for me personally, like, it was hard to look at my children for weeks. How do you explain what kind of world you've brought children into when things like this happen and it's, targeting Jews especially? And so I would find myself getting notifications on my cell phone from Times of Israel in class, seeing missiles approaching Haifa. I would run out of class, call my grandma, be like, get your shoes on, you're gonna get a siren in a minute. Innocent lives lost on all sides is a tremendous tragedy. All we expect is the same treatment, back.
I mean, how do you recover after that conversation?
It's pretty crazy, huh?
Every week, we are in a new location.
But if the content sucks, it sucks anyway. Yeah, let's go.
Let's go. Good morning, Shanee.
Good morning.
We are pumped for this episode. This is episode 14
Of Approach the Bench.
without a bench.
Yeah, no bench. I slipped on ice this morning. It's a horrible day outside, and it completely shattered a leg and an arm. It's getting fixed by my cousin right now, so hopefully it'll be back for the next episode.
Was finishing up some work. I get a text from Will. I see, I'm so sorry, bro. And as soon as I saw that, first off, I thought you got hurt.
Yeah.
That's what my first thought was, like, you broke your leg or something. I was like, crap, we'll be out for like 2 weeks. And then I heard the bench was broken. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, even worse.
So much worse.
Yeah.
So no, thankfully it'll be fixed and we'll bring it back in the future. But for now, to make up for it, we have a beautiful and wonderful guest, Shanee, which you go by, it's Kay now, or is it Markovitz? Markovitz Kay. Okay, Markovitz Kay. And we're also in her home, which is beautiful and nice, on the couch. And so before we keep going, we should probably at least introduce her so you guys can get to know. And you're going to hear a lot from Shanee today because Shanee is an Israeli American. And so what that means, how she's lived her life, how she came to Harvard Law School as a mother of two children. She's truly, I'm just going to say this, one of the absolute most impressive people I have ever met in terms of all of the things she has to juggle. And we're going to get into that, but we obviously have our little questions that we often start with.
Yeah.
So
my first question, Shanee, for you is, what are your kids' names?
My older daughter is named Oz Shachal, and my younger daughter is named Aviv Or.
What does that mean?
So Oz means strength.
Okay. Wow.
It's become a very popular name after October 7th because there's a kibbutz called Oz, and also there was other parts of battles that involved the name Oz. But when we named her Oz, she was the only Oz that we had ever met.
Wow.
And it's a gender-neutral name, so even less popular amongst girls. And Shachal is the first rays of light that you see in the morning.
Wow.
It had always been my favorite name, but my husband vetoed, so it became a middle name.
I see. That's really,
And
really
Aviv?
pretty. Yeah, what about Aviv?
And Aviv means spring, and Or means light.
So spring light. Nice.
How old are they? And then also, who's your favorite?
So they're actually very patriotic babies because Oz was born on 4th of July.
Amen. God bless America.
4 years ago. And Aviv was born on President's Day.
Yes. God bless America,
Almost
baby.
3 years ago. So
Woo!
4 and 3.
Okay. And who's your favorite?
Okay, great question. So for all the parents out there, I do not buy it that you don't have a favorite.
Nice.
Every
That's
parent
so-
has a favorite. What I will say is the favorite typically changes with time. It can fluctuate on a daily basis, an hourly basis, depending on the amount of sleep that everybody has gotten.
I would say that's true, except that my parents consistently think that I'm the best.
They're lying.
So, no, I don't think that they're lying. I think that they genuinely believe that.
You
At least
might
I
be
tell
the
myself
best,
that.
but you're definitely not always the favorite.
That's probably true. I mean, the youngest. You always you have a sweet spot for the youngest. You must have a sweet spot for
You
the
have a
youngest.
sweet spot for the oldest. You have a sweet spot for the youngest. In my case, I only have two, so they both have a sweet spot. There's always a favorite, and it always changes.
Never the middle.
The middle child just has a bad, it's just not good.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
That's a good take, Shanee.
I
Thanks
think
for
that is
that.
a good take. My question is kind of in the same vein, but I really wanted to get a sense for this. So you came into law school as a mother of two. Like, that must have a very different experience. And also, compared to, I don't know, you meet me at 22 years old. I'm coming in from college, like, single guy. Like, it's a very different vibe of person. How has it impacted your, like, law school experience, being married, having a kid, and then, like, having two kids, and then also being around people like me who are entirely out of that world?
Yeah, so I guess to give you a long answer, one of my favorite, like, defining moments from 1L was in the spring. A bunch of people from our section, which I guess we'll talk about how we know each other soon, were sitting around outside of class, and someone said something to the effect of, You have no excuse as a law school student, as a 1L, to not be able to finish your work by 9 p.m. And a bunch of people were sitting around and they're like, and this person goes, no, if you're just productive and you work when you get home from school and you outline in advance and you do what you need to do, there's nothing holding you back from going to the gym, eating healthy, getting a good night's sleep. At which point I said, well, some of us have other responsibilities out of law school, and it's not just the moms and the parents. Right. There are different people juggling different things in law school. Yep. My experience has been complete chaos. Yeah. I started law school. I had a very, very young under 2 and a 4-month-old or something like that. Yeah. My kids are 18 months apart. I did it on purpose. My kids were both not sleeping through the night. I barely remember the first few months of 1L. Wow. It was really intense. And as your kids get older, it becomes intense in different ways. So they're still intense, but they sleep generally. But I will say that's crazy. And another piece of it that people don't talk about when they ask, oh, how do you do law school with 2 kids, is that there's a war going on across the world in a little land called Israel, where I'm from, where I have 95+% of my family. So I anticipated juggling law school with 2 little kids, and that's a decision that I made. I did not anticipate also dealing with that reality and also dealing with the reality on campus and in the U.S. generally of rising anti-Semitism and all of the ways that impacts daily life. But I think that parents and moms, it's never easy at any stage of life, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, a working mom, especially if you're like in big law, especially if you're in law school. And it's always a challenge, and you find a way to make it work, and you stretch your time to the absolute max. You don't sleep so much, and you do your best, and you juggle.
Yeah, that's really well put.
Very well put. When's number 3 coming?
I will let you know the second it happens, Will.
Okay, great.
Is that a possibility?
I mean, look, I'm 26, so I'm not going to say never. It's not happening anytime soon.
Okay, that's very, very nice. So I appreciate this.
Very nice.
I'm hoping there's a third because I was the third. So I'm naturally biased.
Take care of it?
No, absolutely not. No, I'm not going to do either of those things. But I will tell you, I think it's a great idea still.
Generally, do Jews adopt?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
I know Jews who have adopted. I'm not sure what the rates are compared to like non-Jews. Honestly, it might be similar, might be different, but it's definitely on the table.
Okay.
Is it on the table for you?
I don't know. We'll see. It's not off the table.
Okay, great, thanks.
No, but those are really interesting answers, and they actually get to the root of the matter, why it's so amazing to have Shanee here, which is she has a million other things going on. Yep. And yet we still really, really, really wanted to have her on to be able to share her experience because, one, as you've noticed already, she's incredibly articulate and brilliant. And two, she's also at Harvard Law School with us. She's one of our fellow impending lawyers, although she's my class, not Will's. Will is a year younger than us, as you can tell from his clearly young face. And we wanted to at least have somebody who could come on and give a better explanation of some of the things that we're going to talk about when Will and I are later after this. We're going to continue some more of the episode and talk about our personal experience on the Israel trip. But I really wanted to actually have somebody who would real life, kind of an expert opinion almost on Israel, because we're going to get so many things wrong. So it's nice to have somebody who actually has lived through Israel and everything else with it when we're getting into it.
So as Mason alluded to, Shanee is a 3L here at Harvard Law School. I believe you guys were in the same section.
We were.
Yep. As the 1L. And I met Shanee really like my first week as a 1L last year at a events fair kind of for all the student orgs.
It was me.
I thought it was Joe Klein.
No, I grabbed you and I brought you over.
Oh, yeah. I remember Joe Klein too.
I grabbed you and I was like, I know you're interested in the Israel stuff. So I brought you over. I was like, this is another Christian guy who might be interested. I remember this.
Yeah. I mean, I was taken immediately by Shanee's presence and just her. Yeah, the amazing sweets that we had at the table. But Shanee is the president of Alliance for Israel, which is, we could explain more about that later. But
so Alliance for Israel, I feel like I'm probably not well suited to be able to go through all the history. But what I can say is that Alliance for Israel was an organization and is an organization at Harvard that has obviously advocated on behalf of Israeli students, and Jewish students are often implicated by by any Israel advocacy. Yeah. But it became much, much bigger and more active in the wake of October 7th, because literally by October 8th, there was a ton of stuff, which we're going to talk about, happening at Harvard's campus, as I'm sure you've seen in the news.
Yeah. And I came kind of on not the back end totally, but a little bit removed from that whole situation. Like, it wasn't as bad my 1L year as it was their 1L year. But I came, and I'll talk more about this maybe when I share my personal connection to this topic, but wanting to be involved in a group that was standing up for Israel, because I felt like it was a very important time to stand up for Israel and for the Jewish students at Harvard Law School's campus specifically. So joined the board with Alliance for Israel. Now I'm on the executive board with Shanee and another woman. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I know Shanee.
Other women on the podcast.
Oh, yeah, with Lindsay. Duh.
Yes, Lindsay is another person.
It wasn't Lindsay just last semester, but yeah, now Lindsay's on the executive
and so we're really excited to do it. And I think it's also important too, as we're coming in, as you're seeing, getting a better sense of where we're landing on this, also who we are and who Shanee is. I really want to make sure that people know, like, why also we're doing the pod. And so, Shanee, I think the interesting question is, why are you here? Why are you willing to talk, especially in light of how tumultuous the social media world can be?
Sure. So I think sort of the motto of the podcast doesn't exactly align with me. I'm not Christian. I'm an Orthodox Jew, a modern Orthodox Jew. I'm not in FedSoc. I am not a bachelor nor a bachelorette. I'm married.
Yep.
I am in Harvard.
You are.
Yeah.
And I also typically shy away from social media and doing any sort of conversations about these topics in public, because I think a lot of the impactful work is done behind closed doors on campus with people that I actually have relationships with, students and administrators. But these two gentlemen are on my board, as they mentioned, and I'm very appreciative that they're on the board, because I don't think Israel is just an issue for Jews. And I don't think it had ever been just an issue for Jews. There are many allies, and allies isn't even the best word, because it's your issue too. Christians care deeply about Israel. And so I'm very appreciative that despite the social costs of being a part of Alliance for Israel at Harvard Law School, these two gentlemen really dove in with us. And Mason and I started on AFI at the same time. We dealt with a lot of the same garbage, 1L. And Will, I remember meeting Will at the coffee shop where I interviewed him for joining the board. And I was like, why in the world would you want to join Alliance for Israel given what's going on campus? And I remember something to the effect of, I know it's the right thing to do. And because these two people have been standing up for me and my community and our community, I agreed to be on their podcast because they feel very passionately about their podcast.
That's really sweet. Thank you.
That is very, very sweet.
I want to kind of redirect a little bit to your background and kind of the perspective that you're going to bring. So 2 questions. One, you mentioned that you're modern Orthodox Jew. Could you kind of just explain what that means and maybe give us a brief window into the types of differences between different practices within Judaism? And then also, because this will be really important, I think, can you give a little background on where you were born and where you grew up, and your ties to both Israel and America?
Sure. So there are many different types of Jews. There are many different sects, if you will, of Judaism. There's conservative, reformed, and then there's also like ultra-Orthodox, Haredi, Hasidic. We fall like sort of what we believe to be in the middle-ish of the spectrum, although I will say different people view themselves as being in the middle of the spectrum. I'm not covering my hair. I'm wearing pants. I'm a modern Orthodox Jew. Primarily for, the way that I dress, and also there are differences in practice. Modern Orthodox Jews typically believe that it's appropriate, acceptable, and even desired to be part of the regular, secular, if you will, society. And so I'm at Harvard Law School. I plan to be a practicing lawyer and not secluded in the Jewish community. But modern Orthodox Jews also typically send their kids to Jewish day schools and try to infuse their life with Jewish values and tradition. So funny story, I think it's pretty hard to describe like the little differences between the different sects within Orthodoxy. And one time my husband was at work 3-4 years ago, and he was trying to describe it. And his coworker said, I thought all Orthodox Jews like dress a very specific way, black and white garments. And my husband was like, no, like let's look up modern Orthodox Jew on Google. And you'll see that it just looks like normal people. Like you can't really differentiate. So he Googles modern Orthodox Jew. And the first picture that comes up is my husband and I.
That's
so
hilarious.
So this guy was like, the Jews are controlling the media. Or maybe there are like only 5 of you in existence. When in reality, we had done like a big media campaign when we got married about something called the halachic prenup, which we could talk about later. But Very funny, but yes, modern Orthodox Jews often look like me.
That's
you
so
can't really
funny.
tell when you're around one.
Wow.
I didn't answer
Amazing.
your second.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
okay.
no, that's still really interesting. And I think it's helpful to get a sense of like all of the different practices within Judaism, especially when you go to Israel and also interacting with the Jewish community more. I've learned so much about how many differences there really are in terms of practice.
Yeah. And you really see this on the ground. Like you don't really get a total sense for just how many differences there are, I think. Or I could say the best place to see that difference is in Israel, because it is really a spectrum.
You get to see it all. I mean, you go from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, you get very different vibes.
Definitely.
But no, before we get into that though, where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Kind of, how'd you end up at Harvard?
Okay, so I was born in Eilat, which is the southernmost tip of Israel. And I lived there for a few years. I'm actually third generation born Eilat, which is very unusual. Most Israelis that you meet will say, whoa, you're from Eilat? It's kind of like the Las Vegas of Israel, people call it. I don't view it that way. I think it's a very special place. But my great-grandmother escaped from a ghetto in Germany to Israel and helped found Eilat, the city.
Wow.
And then my grandma was born there, my mom was born there, I was born there. I broke the chain. My kids are born in Florida. But that's where I'm from. And then at age 4, we moved to the U.S. Like many Israelis, my parents planned on spending a few years here and then ended up staying here after the 2008 financial crisis. And I grew up largely in South Florida, a little bit in New York, but mostly in South Florida, where there is a pretty large Jewish community and a pretty large Israeli community as well. After high school, spent my gap year in Israel, which is something that a lot of modern Orthodox students do. They graduate high school, they defer college for a year, and they go to Israel for a year to study Jewish text.
Yep.
So that could be the Talmud, which is like the legal basis of a lot of Jewish practice. We study Bible, which we call the Torah, Tanakh, all sorts of philosophy questions, biblical criticism. And I did that. I was already dating my husband at that point. He also went, but we went to different institutions because it's usually single-gendered institutions. And then back to the U.S. for college. Harvard is a whole other question.
Yeah, Harvard is a different question for sure, but I'm interested too, like, is it common in your community to get married? You were 19 when you got married. Is it common to get married that early, to have kids as young as you've had?
I was not 19 when I got married.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I was 21.
Oh, wow.
I was 23.
Basically got that way wrong.
I had just turned 21, to be fair.
Okay.
My bad.
I would say there's a range. There are people who certainly get married on the younger end. In my specific friend group, it's not so common to get married this young, but my husband and I are high school sweethearts. So we started dating when I was 14.
Wow, that's sweet.
And it basically was inevitable that we would get married young, because when you're practicing modern Orthodox, it comes with conditions on relationships. There are boundaries to relationships, including not living together, and not having sex. I don't know if we want to say that on the podcast. I mean, I think it's something that's good for people to know.
Yeah.
When you're abiding by those laws and you start dating at 14.
I promise we've talked about that a lot too, because that's also common in Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. Modern Orthodox Christianity, maybe one might say.
Modern Orthodox Christianity coming to you on Approach the Bench.
Yeah, something like that. But no, it's really interesting. And you guys didn't do like the whole, I know that there's the more Orthodox Jewish communities will have like arranged marriage kind of vibe stuff, where like you get set up with somebody, you go on a date with them in like a hotel space, you don't touch each other at all, you talk for a little bit, and then you go on like 5 dates, and if you decide they're right, then you just get married. You didn't do that?
That's not really modern Orthodox.
That's ultra.
That makes sense.
Okay.
It's closer to ultra, or...
So there's also like classically Orthodox. We have a friend at school with us that was actually on the trip with us.
Yeah.
And she calls it Yeshiva University Machmir, which means like the university we went to is a Jewish university. And Machmir means you do the intense way of doing a Jewish law or tradition.
I see. Okay.
And those people also, they're not ultra-Orthodox. They're Orthodox. But it's not modern Orthodox. In modern Orthodox circles, usually you'll meet people pretty naturally. You could get set up by friends, much like non-Jews get set up by friends, by mutual friends, but there's no resumes. There's no like meet me in a hotel bar situation.
Nice. And you guys still do, as modern Orthodox, Shabbat, where you give up on technology for basically 24 hours time, and also practice the holidays where the same things can be applicable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we keep the laws of kosher, so we have a whole different dietary regime than most students do on campus. And there are many other areas of Jewish law that impact your life that most people don't talk about basically on a daily basis. Jewish life is based around tradition and law, so which makes it a little bit different from Christianity, which is more about the spirit and a way of life, and less about like the specific laws in the Old Testament, right?
Yep, yeah. Correct.
Totally. I mean, we view it as like Jesus was the fulfillment of the law, and therefore the law no longer is something that is meant to be like binding on us as like a ritualistic practice, but something that sets us free.
Yeah.
And so we do practice to some degree like a Sabbath, but it's not nearly as strict.
So you were mentioned that you were born in Eilat, but then you moved to Florida.
Nice.
So I'm just curious, like, how do you navigate those two identities, Israeli, American? How do you sort through that? Which one do you feel more strongly connected to, if that's a good question, or take it wherever you want?
It's a great question. My answer is that I don't feel more strongly connected necessarily, although of course naturally at different points in life everybody feels more or less connected to different pieces of their identity. I don't view it as a hierarchy. I'm a very proud Israeli. I'm a very proud American. I'm a proud Jew. I think probably the only piece, and there are other pieces of my identity too, the only piece of my identity that really stands above the others at this point in my life is that I'm a mom. And I think that is something that is different from everything else about me, and that I intentionally put more emphasis on and lean into. But otherwise, in terms of being Israeli and American, I think it's a very natural mix. I grew up in a super culturally Israeli household. Kids running around, barefoot, often unclothed at early years, lots of directness. Everybody was honest, open, involved in each other's lives. We still are, and we love it. It's a big part of what makes our family special. But also I went to American schools. A lot of my friends are purely American, and I've been very influenced by American values too. And when I go to Israel, that shows as well. And I think those two pieces really mix, and it's challenging at a time when Israel is in war and you're living in America. And I think a lot of American Jews, let alone American Israelis, feel a sense of guilt, a sense of responsibility, which is why I got involved in Alliance for Israel. I actually didn't have any intention of doing serious Israel work on campus. I just wanted to focus on law and getting through law school with two little kids.
Yeah.
But when there's a crisis in Israel, it impacts you on such a deep level when you're Jewish, and especially when you're Israeli, to the point where, and maybe we could put up an image of Shira Bibas. I don't know if you've spoken about her on the podcast. There's a very traumatizing video from October 7th of a mother named Shira Bibas carrying her two little toddler boys in her arms, redhead boys, getting taken from their home into captivity of Hamas in Gaza. And as a Jewish mom, I know I speak for many when I say, you look at that video, you can't help but see yourself and see your children. And it took, forever to find out what happened to them. Constantly in your thoughts, in your prayers, not just like, once a week. I thought about her on a daily basis without exaggeration. Only, of course, to find out that she was brutally murdered and her two babies were torn apart by the hands, literally killed in the hands of terrorists, in cold blood. And that's what it means to be an Israeli American today, is to sit here, understand that, we're privileged, and that there's so much going on in Israel that impacts us because we believe that all Jews and Israelis are interconnected. And how do you deal with that? How do you balance that? And what can you do? And that's been a motivating question for me for my entire time, basically, at HLS.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense in terms of why you have to balance those identities then. Because obviously with everything going on in Israel, and with the fact that you were born there, that you have so much family there, there's a lot of interest and a lot of stake, honestly. There's a lot at stake with what happens in Israel. I think it's interesting to me too, because as an American, like first and foremost, I have a lot of different ancestry, but at this point, everybody in my family would just like it's just American. And I think as conservatives, there's a natural inclination for me especially to like hear that and say like, I really want people to be like pro-America when they're American. And so I think it's a difficult tension, and this is something that I kind of want to explore as we go forward. And I think that there is a way to explore this and to do it right, because there is dual citizens to every country.
Yeah,
there are dual citizens to Britain. There are dual citizens
I'm a
to
dual
France,
citizen.
and you are a dual citizen,
Yes.
which is to Canada, though. I don't think that's a legitimate country. But like those are always tensions for people when you
Right.
have dual citizenship,
Yeah.
when that is a thing. Because I think as a citizen that you have an obligation to your state in one way or another.
Go ahead.
I agree. I think you do have an obligation to your state, and I don't view it as a tension. I think Israel is a natural ally to America. I mean, you can explore, and maybe when you tour, if you can talk about how there has been strategic cooperation, financial cooperation in all areas of the military, ranging from Israel helping America understand PTSD treatment, to the sharing of defense technology that's been created. And at least I think as long as Israel has existed thus far, Israel and America have been the closest natural allies. So I understand your point, but I actually don't feel a tension between the two. And I will say, your point is very well taken about your family being from different places and sort of a melting pot in America. I think most Jews that you talk to, if you go back even just 2 generations, sometimes 1, but always 2, there's almost always at least 1 grandparent, and often all 4 grandparents were persecuted out of their countries.
Yep.
Often in the Holocaust, but not only in the Holocaust. 2 out of my 4 were not in Eastern Europe. 1 was Morocco, 1 was Egypt. They both left by being kicked out of their home, sought refuge in Israel, which is why, although I'm a proud American, I also think Israel is critical for the safety of the Jewish people, because history has always repeated itself.
Yep.
Jews have been persecuted out of every country they've lived in. It's the first time in modern history that there's a Jewish homeland that Jews feel can protect them in a time of need, whether it be abroad or, God forbid, in America, although we hope and expect that it won't happen here.
Yeah.
And I don't view it in tension at all. I think it's 2 different important parts of my identity that work very well together.
Yeah. I can relate to the tension piece a little bit, but also kind of the dual allegiances piece. Like, for me personally, I feel much more connected to America because I was born here. My dad's Canadian, so I have citizenship through him. But I often say, like, and I've said, I think on the podcast before, that if Canada responded to some evil in the world, like, or a war, like in World War I, where Canada was fighting and U.S. was not, I would go fight for Canada. If I wouldn't fight against America, if Canada and America were at war, I'd fight for America. But I can connect to the piece of like having a bit of dual allegiances, even though my primary is to America. And then I found it, when you were sharing, pretty interesting to hear that, like, when you came to Harvard, you were not thinking about doing Israeli advocacy or any sort of, student group about Israel. But that all changed probably after October 7th. And I mean, that changed for me too. I mean, I'll share this later, but like, Israel was it was always implicit, like, yeah, I support Israel for some of the reasons you were saying, like strategic ally, great trade partner. I mean, we'll talk about the tech and the venture capital connections between Israel and America, and that's really interesting to me and important to me. But it was never something that I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to go, stand up for Israel when I go to Harvard Law School. It was really in the wake of October 7th and just seeing the craziness on campuses that drew me in.
Yeah, and what I will say before we kind of hop into how October 7th changed everything, and maybe this is just sort of a response too, but I think that there's 2 questions here still, right? There's the question of like being a dual citizen, and then there's also the question of like American interests, right, in Israel.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes, like, as an Israeli American or as a Canadian American, things like that, it makes sense for you individually to care about the place that you also have a citizenship to, that your people also call home, things like that. That makes sense. But to most people, such as myself, right, when we hear these issues, oftentimes it's espoused from that point of view of like dual citizenship, right? Of like, we have this obligation to this other group. And the reality is, as just an American, I feel no obligation. I feel no obligation to any other country than my own. And first and foremost to the kingdom of God, right, as a Christian.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why there's the separate question. I think that's why it's important that you bring this up, that like as Americans, I think that ultimately there's a lot of interests that intersect with Israel's. I really think that from an American point of view, I look at it and I'm like, strategically, there's a lot of things that we can get out of Israel. And I know that's like transactional, but I think it's important to say that because a million people hear like the question of like, oh, you have obligations to other places. How does that apply to me? Like you are clearly just biased towards this other group, and actually I should be biased against them because I don't like the idea of having to have obligations. It's like, no, there are actually other reasons here. But yeah, if there's nothing else on that, we can move into kind of talking about October 7th.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Shanee, obviously, October 7th is a watershed moment in the history of Israel and the history of, honestly, global politics. It's something that will go down in those history books. Where were you on that day? How did it affect you immediately before we get into everything else?
So, October 7th was actually a Jewish holiday, which means I was off tech, off news, offline, at home. My dad and my brother were visiting my kids, as they often do on Jewish holidays. And I remember my dad woke me up, must have been around 6 a.m. Israel is 7 hours ahead. So all the atrocities began in the very early morning in Israel, but 6 a.m. here is 1 p.m. in Israel. So things were already unfolding pretty dramatically. He woke me up and he said, I wanted to let you sleep. I'm sorry I woke you up. I wanted to let you sleep a little bit more because I don't know what's going to happen from here on out. And I needed to give you a few more hours of sleep, even though I've been following the news for hours. This is what he told me. He said, Israel is at war. And I said, okay, Israel's at war. What else is new? There's always something going on in Israel. I've personally been in Israel through several skirmishes, wars, different ways to classify it. And I thought, okay, this sucks. This is going to be a hard few weeks. And he looked at me and he said, no. This is unlike anything I've seen in my life. Like, things are falling apart. This is an existential threat. And I remember immediately thinking, oh my gosh, it's a Jewish holiday. My sister's in Israel. My in-laws are in Israel. My sister lives in Israel. My in-laws were visiting. It's a big problem. And I started hearing words like invasion, kidnapping, things that never in my lifetime. And I don't think any Israelis thought that this was possible, that there could be a ground invasion in Israel, given that the IDF is such a powerful force, a protective force. And so I remember thinking at the same time, I have family, I can't be on my phone, and making a very quick decision, which I never had before, to break the holiday, to access my technology, to check in on my loved ones, make sure that people were still alive and that we could contact them. And I remember the same day on October 7th, my brother again was in my apartment and my dad found a name of a soldier that was murdered. And it was somebody that my brother was very close with at camp, his big brother, a very young person, a little bit younger than us. He ran into a kibbutz, one of the areas around the border, to rescue people, was murdered. And that was day one. So I remember thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to lose so many people that we know and love personally. And that is the case. That's exactly what happened. We had, an atrocity occur that day, an atrocity unlike anything since the Holocaust.
And so what's actually happening then too is that there's the Gaza Strip. From there, 5,000 Hamas fighters invade into Israel on that Jewish holiday, meet minimal resistance, and go for miles into the Israel homeland itself, abduct, 254, 253?
251.
251.
Plus 3 that were already in Gaza from before.
251 people taken back, and over 1,200 people are murdered. That's not accounting for casualties. That's murdered 1,200 people.
Right. And that's not accounting for what happened after the fact as well, including, by the way, attacking a music festival for people who were there living life, celebrating peace out in the wilderness. There were paragliders came in. So they came in on the foot. They tried to come in by sea. They had less success there. Paragliding and thousands upon thousands of rockets, of course, all on the same day.
Yeah, and we actually went to the sites where all of this happened just last week. And we got to see firsthand what that looks like, to be in a place like the Nova Festival, and to see how open it is, and also to see all the memorials with 400 people murdered, who are all, by the way, you walk around in those and look at photos of them, they're our age. They're like, they look like me or you, like people I know who are just literally out there partying. And like, Will, I'm not a partier. Like I'm not that kind of vibe guy, and I know a lot of people who are like that. I cannot imagine my friends going to something like that and then hearing the horror stories.
Right. And Mason, you say like people I know, but what people need to understand is for the Jews on campus, it literally is people we know.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody has family, friends in Israel. Everybody's been touched by October 7th and its aftermath. And we've also been touched by October 8th. Yeah. Because what happened on October 8th when we finally got our technology back, I checked on family, I put it away for the rest of the holiday, which was really challenging. October 8th, we turn on our phones, and what was it, 38 Harvard Law School student organizations,
including law schools.
The first thing that I see is on the New York Times, a letter signed by, I think, 38, something like that, and you can pull it up maybe and show your viewers, already blaming Israel on October 8th.
Yep.
For October 7th, forget genocide, forget large proportions of civilians. That's all of the allegations to follow. No, this started on October 8th.
Yeah, and there's that famous tweet afterwards. It was like, what did you think revolution would look like?
Right.
Essays, papers, all this other stuff. And you see that sort of response to the videos that were coming out of Israel. I mean, like you could see immediately, Hamas live streamed what they did. They live streamed it. They live streamed brutal murders, burning people alive. They made sure that there was actual evidence of it, and they called home, letting their parents know and all these other people that like, oh, I just killed a Jew. You could see it all firsthand, and the initial reaction of so many students. And now, what I should qualify here is a lot of it was student leadership. This is the first thing. There are many people I know who were within those student groups who did not agree with what was said in any way with those petitions. But within the span of 24 hours, a bunch of the student leadership at the most prestigious school, I would say in the entire country, I'm biased, but literally get together and say, we're going to rubber stamp this. We're going to rubber stamp this as rebellion. This is revolution when you're watching somebody blow
a baby's head off.
Basically a baby's head off. Innocent civilians. That should never be the response of the kind of person. And I don't think that's a response of Israelis towards any acts of war.
Totally. And I will say that I think it's very troubling to look at this and not help but think, is there any other moment in history where there's an atrocity, a huge wide-scale terrorist attack, let alone of this nature and the disgusting, vile things that took place on October 7th, where the initial gut reaction of rational, thoughtful people is to blame the victim? And this is why so many of us are sounding the warning bells. This is the start of the new wave of anti-Semitism, which is through the demonization of Israel.
Yeah. And anecdotally, I know Lindsay wouldn't mind me sharing this, but something that came up on the trip, because Lindsay was on that as well, we got to hear firsthand from survivors, as including hostages and also a survivor of the Nova Music Festival. While we were at the Nova Music Festival site, we read accounts of rapes that happened, horrible, horrible rapes. And there were a lot of them that day, just atrocities committed. And I think that the New York Times published a long piece on this. And one thing that Lindsay shared on the trip that struck me was the response to that New York Times article, again, kind of as Shanee's pointing out, was to doubt the eyewitness testimonies, to kind of like not really victim blame in the traditional sense, but sort of adopt that posture. And I just think that like even in this wave of, Me Too and all these like sexual assault allegations, it's never been the response of the people who were doing it this time to doubt the narratives that were coming out. But it's like only now are they, doubting Israeli women and eyewitnesses for these horrible atrocities.
It's also stupid because, like, they're literally burning people alive, murdering them at point blank range, and all of these other things. And then you're like, oh yeah, but they would never violate them. They would never do that. It's the dumbest argument I've ever heard. And also trying to prove that point. This is the thing that was frustrating to me with many of my friends who were talking about this right afterwards. They're like, oh, that didn't happen. And I was like, why does that matter to you? Why does it matter so much to try to go out of your way to be like, well, I want to see specific evidence of this thing itself, when you've already guaranteed from all the other videos that this other stuff has happened in the first place? The only reason you want to prove that is because fundamentally at the end of the day, your knee-jerk reaction to seeing this sort of stuff is that you think that the people deserved it.
Yeah. And that it's a respectfully, me too, unless I'm a Jew. Yeah. And that's how the Jewish community here feels, is that if it were any other, minority group, that were making allegations that members have been raped, babies have been killed, the response would be empathy. But here it's been vilification. And I will say, I know Mason's going to ask me if I've experienced anti-Semitism at Harvard Law School. And I can just share an anecdote from October 11th. We were tabling actually together, Mason.
Yeah.
And we were trying to shed light on what had happened just a few days prior, because already on campus things were extremely heated. And I remember 3 student leaders, 3 women, came up to me and said, "You have here an article that says babies were killed on October 7th. That didn't happen." And I said, "What news source do you believe in? I will pull up Al Jazeera for you. CNN, everybody has reported babies have been killed. Babies have been taken hostage. What news source can I show you?" And they said, "Nothing you can show me would convince me."
Yeah.
That literally happened in front of 12 people.
I remember.
And I don't know how else to describe that, frankly, other than anti-Semitism. And yes, I've also experienced since October 7th anti-Semitism in the classical sense. Just a few months ago, we were in Sharon, Massachusetts, walking to synagogue with our kids, and somebody rolled by, pulled down the window. And by the way, you can tell that people are walking to synagogue because it's large chunks of people that visibly look Jewish with kippahs, yarmulkes, tzitzit, going to synagogue, pulled down their window, yelled, and spat in our direction. So things like that happen for sure, but most of the time it is about Israel, unfortunately.
Shanee, you were here on October 7th in at Harvard. I was not yet, but can you just kind of share your experience about the aftermath? We already talked about the October 8th situation, October 11th, but like what else happened that made you be like, okay, like this is a problem? And I guess as you could also probably address, like what did Harvard administration do or not do about that?
All great questions. So I think there are parallel issues happening simultaneously post October 7th. One is, and we don't talk about this often, acute trauma experienced by the Jewish community at the law school, which is, all over, but I'm focusing on the law school. That's my role. I felt traumatized. And, for me personally, like it was hard to look at my children for weeks. How do you explain what kind of world you've brought children into when things like this happen and it's, targeting Jews especially? And everybody I know at Harvard Law School, all the Jews were deeply traumatized. And we still had to do law school. At Harvard Law School, which is never an easy feat, but especially when your brain is swirling in a million directions. So, for example, my grandma lives in Haifa. My dad's mother lives in Haifa. I'm very close with her. Later on in the war, Lebanon was involved, or more specifically, Hezbollah was involved, sending missiles, ballistic missiles, and often hitting Haifa. My grandma's an elderly woman. She, would get waken up in the middle of the night, feel shocked, not know really how to get by herself to a safe room. Israel is filled with safe rooms. The boys can talk about it later. And so I would find myself getting notifications on my cell phone from Times of Israel in class, seeing, missiles approaching Haifa. I would run out of class, sometimes multiple times a class. I don't know if you noticed, Mason, but call my grandma, be like, "Get your shoes on. You're going to get a siren in a minute." Constantly throughout the day. So this was going on for years, right? 2 years so far.
Wow.
So we had a population deeply traumatized, struggling to get through school that we had to help and deal with and be part of. And that is especially, why I'm grateful for people like Mason who were around and held hands with us as we walked through this period, even not fully understanding what you were doing at the time. And then, of course, everything happening on Harvard, things from, immediately calling Israel's response a genocide, refusing to have any real dialogue about what was going on. And, I have a lot to critique Israel on. I'm happy to sit down and talk with anybody. I don't think that Israel is committing a genocide, but that aside, there's a lot to talk about. Not finding partners to speak with, people refusing to have even conversations. Jews getting shunned out of different law school groups on campus, especially the Middle Eastern Law Student Association, which Israel is in the Middle East. But when you're online on their, Slack, and it's constantly about how the Zionist movement is out to destroy the world, obviously people who are Zionist, which is most Jews that I know, because Zionism is a core tenet of Judaism that I practice, are shunned out of those groups.
Could you explain Zionism really simply for the audience real quick?
Zionism, very simply, is a belief that Jewish people should have a homeland in the biblical state of Israel, biblical land of Israel. And, there are different flavors of Zionism, and it doesn't resolve all the questions of modern state of Israel. It doesn't resolve border disputes. There are different ways to view that. Zionism doesn't necessarily take a stance on any of that on the West Bank, on what to do with different land swaps. Certainly doesn't preclude the two-state solution, which is what most Jews in my lifetime had advocated for before October 7th. You go to AIPAC, like the largest, pro-Israel movement other than maybe CUFI in the United States, and everybody's advocating for a two-state solution. So obviously Zionism doesn't at all preclude that. But it's a very simple belief that there needs to be a homeland in the biblical land of Israel. And the reason is obviously, well, two reasons. One, that's what God promised. And two, that we've been kicked out of every other country in all of history.
Yeah. And so just to before we move on to a little bit more about like the response from Israel to October 7th and everything else like that, I'd also love to hear a little bit more about like kind of the long-term trajectory of things at Harvard from your experience, especially dealing with like there was the BDS resolution that student government pushed, and just the general vibe of like walking by protesters all the time, and then encampments in April of 2024. What was that like?
Yeah, it was pretty horrible, again, because I think people were just getting lots of satisfaction from their activism, if you want to call it that, on campus, but not actually trying to have conversations and make real change and find a solution to the problem. Especially BDS, I think, is a perfect example of how unthoughtful this movement is. A lot of Palestinians in the West Bank want to work for Israeli companies. BDS does not support that.
And BDS stands for?
Boycott, divest, sanction Israel. And one thing that I will just say to the viewership, if you're interested in BDS, just go on their website. They will be the first to tell you that they are anti-normalization. So anybody who says that they want to actually solve this conflict can agree that communication, negotiation, talking, dialogue is at the center. BDS is opposed to any dialogue or normalization with the state of Israel. And so I would encourage people on campus who are thinking about BDS to keep that in mind. But yes, it's very hurtful. It's very unthoughtful. And it doesn't actually promote any solutions. And it doesn't actually involve the stakeholders involved either. You're walking around Harvard and there's a huge underrepresentation of the people who actually are involved in this conflict in a lot of these protest movements, which are just chanting, rhymes and mottos that do not impact on the ground change. And instead vilify Israel, make Jewish students know for sure, without a doubt, that they are excluded from the general membership of the Harvard Law School community, without any positive change. Another interesting thing that we saw, from AFI, so not just the Jewish community, but the entire pro-Israel community, which is quite large actually on campus.
How many members?
So we started with 5 members before October 7th, at least when I was involved, just before October 7th. And I think our group chat has 60-something active members, so people who are in our group chat and attend events. And of course, not everybody attends every event on campus, but we have a pretty, and I would say that's one of the largest groups that I know about on campus.
It's very active.
It's quite large, it's quite active, it's very close-knit. It's a really vibrant, beautiful community. I encourage you all to join. But something that we were tracking was the student government response to what was going on. And early on, we reached out and we urged them to pass a resolution condemning the violence of October 7th, the largest Jewish atrocity on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. They, of course, refused because it's Jews. So why bother? And then we realized last year we heard rumblings of a resolution that was going to pass that would call for a referendum, so a full student body vote on boycott, divest, sanction. Although, to Harvard's credit, it has repeatedly said it will not be divesting. It's not even practically a possibility, I think, based on the fact that like NASDAQ is filled with Israeli companies.
It's so silly.
But putting the practical aspects aside, Student Gov refused to condemn October 7th. They sent out an email, though, sympathetic to the Palestinian people, but God forbid they should send the same for the Israelis. Whereas in our student events early on, we definitely made a point to mourn innocent lives lost on all sides, because innocent lives lost on all sides is a tremendous tragedy. And all we expect is the same treatment, back. And by December of last year, so now we're in December of 2023, we heard rumblings of the then Student Gov that was going to pass a resolution to go for a referendum on BDS. And we looked up what resolutions had student gov passed until then, because one would think the student government of a law school in America would be focused on things like mental health, credits, getting money for TF positions, getting better accessibility in the older buildings. No, between March of 2022 and December of 2023, or no, December of 2024.
Yeah.
March of 2022 and December of 2024, the student government had passed only 4 resolutions, all of which were about Israel, all of which vilified Israel specifically. Instead of taking balanced views, being pro-Palestinian and pro-Israelis, or any other more rational, reasonable things to do, the only things that they put out during that period were 4 anti-Israel resolutions, which again, what does that tell your student body, your Jewish students?
Yeah.
We can get behind a lot of Jewish pro-Israel students are actually really liberal. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about time, place, and manner restrictions, when you're talking about not disciplining students for protesting in libraries, a lot of Jewish students would be happy to support that, to get behind that, but not when there's always a PS, Israel's committing a genocide.
Right.
So we realized that was happening. We called them out. They quickly passed like one resolution unrelated in December just to be able to say that, no, that's not the only thing they're working on. And if you look at their student government website from before then, they had always passed a plethora of resolutions every year that supported the well-being of the student body.
Right.
So again, things like that, they happen, they compound, they're over and over, and it causes you to reach the inevitable conclusion that it has morphed into, there is a new anti-Semitism that is hiding behind anti-Zionism. And it's really sad and it's very scary.
Yeah.
I know that we'd want to talk a little bit more about some of the positives coming out of Harvard, and I know that there are some positives for sure in terms of the administration wasn't all bad, and they did make some steps. But given time restrictions and to make sure that we respect Shanee's time, I also want to get us into a conversation
About the way forward.
about the response.
Yeah.
Because I know most people, especially people who may not be like fully on board
Yeah.
with Israel or especially see all the news,
Yeah.
their response to this is, okay, you've said all of these things about like how horrible things have been for the people of Israel, how they've been terrorized. What about the people of Gaza, right? And you could see, I mean, many buildings are destroyed in the Gaza Strip. There's a lot of homelessness. There's food dependency, all sorts of terrible things. And as you were talking about, innocent life, generally speaking, should not be terrorized. It should not be ended. And that's a terrible aspect of war. So I'm kind of wondering, what do you think of the Israeli government's response? What do you think of like how to handle this kind of issue, especially when people respond like that? When you're talking about all these things that have happened to you and their initial response is, well, what about this other side?
Right.
Kind of what's your general response for that?
I do not support the killing of innocent lives anywhere at any time. I think what's happening in Gaza is beyond devastating. I could cry if I, get into it. What we've seen from Gaza is atrocious. It's scary. It's unacceptable. I blame Hamas. Unfortunately, there was leadership put in place that is there for the purpose of terrorizing its own people and destroying Israel. And I blame Hamas. I think it's their responsibility. They're the ones that I put all of the moral weight on. That said, I'm not saying that Israel's response was perfect. There's a lot of things that frustrated me. When there's a war, especially civilians are not going to agree with every single thing that's done. There is always room to talk about what could be done better, and there should be conversations about what to be done better. And something that I'm proud of from the IDF is that they can acknowledge when especially soldiers act out of rank and do bad things. And of course they do in the IDF, as they do in every single other force, including the US, and it's unacceptable. Just because it's the IDF doesn't mean it's not unacceptable. They should and do get disciplined. But in terms of looking out and seeing what happened in Gaza, do I blame Israel? Absolutely not. And I just want to remind everybody that Israel had hostages in Gaza until this October.
Right.
Literally this October. And every time there's a conversation, one question that I have is, what do you propose Israel should do? Right after October 7th, when there's a huge, security breach, and the only thing that is coming out of the mouth of Hamas is, we're going to do it again 100 times worse. And we're bordering, right? Israel and Gaza are literally bordering. And we went to Israel. We saw just how close that border is, way closer than I remember.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then also afterwards, when you have active hostages sitting in a civilian, dense, really modern day warfare to an extreme, what is Israel supposed to do to defend itself, to get its hostages home, to ensure that it's not going to happen again? Again, not saying they got it perfect, not saying every soldier is moral, not saying any of that. All room for reasonable critique and debate. But if you're going to single out Israel and treat it differently than you would any other country, any other war, any other military force, I would ask yourself why.
Mm-hmm. Do you have 5 minutes? Do you have 5 minutes?
Literally.
Okay. Mason, I think 5 minutes in closing. Can you just talk about the way forward, both for Jewish Americans, Israeli Americans here, and also maybe for the broader region? It's a huge question.
Yeah.
But 5 minutes.
Okay, so I think that there's a lot of things that are happening around the world that give us, I'm very stressed, I'm very worried, but there's a lot of positives happening. One of them is the Abraham Accords, and I think it would be amazing if we could talk about this more on campus. Arab countries surrounding Israel, or normalizing with Israel, and Will, I think you're going to talk more about this. I think the way forward for sure involves some sort of economic cooperation within the region. And it benefits everybody involved. And it also benefits just bringing down the tension between Muslims and Jews.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's very important. And that's also important on campus. There has to be more dialogue. I am happy to talk to anybody that wants to have a rational, reasonable conversation that involves critique, that involves disappointment put on the IDF, on Israel, as long as it's not demonizing, treating Israel with double standards, and actually talking about a way forward. And I think that more Jews should be open to having those conversations, and certainly more non-Jews should be open to having those conversations. The way forward is dialogue. That's the only way forward.
Do you think in light, this is one of the biggest problems with October 7th, a lot of people feel like there's no hope in dialogue, right? That Hamas's stated goal is to kill everyone who is Jewish or Israeli, and many of the Palestinians, especially at least their communicated goal, is to remove all of the Jews from the state of Israel, go back to where you came from. They don't see it as legitimate. And then there are elements within Israel as well that look at the Palestinians and say, well, we can't work with you, so we're just gonna keep going. Or it is our land, it was promised to us, and therefore there's no need for it. How do you deal with those radical elements? Is there even a possibility for a two-state solution in light of everything?
And I think I've heard you call this question, are these talking matters? And my answer is that they have to be talking matters. We have no other choice. This is the reality we live in. We have to give a better world to our children than the world that we inherited on both sides. Of all the stakeholders involved, these have to be talking matters. We can't give up a hope for peace in the region and also here. It's very scary what we're seeing, the rise of anti-Semitism. I'm not giving up hope on this country, on my country, of good people to stand up and say this is unacceptable path forward. And I think that there's an inclination, and maybe Mason, you also, went into it a little bit, of pointing to the extremes. I think there are a lot of Palestinians in Israel who are Israeli. There are a lot of Palestinians that are not Israeli and want a two-state solution. Like I said, when I grew up, doing pro-Israel activism was all about advocating for a two-state solution. That's the vast majority of Jews that I know. October 7th, of course, complicates it because the question is what's going to happen in both states, right, on day one. Mm-hmm. But that's not to say that it's off the table. It's something that needs to be thought through. And people need to be thinking about it. People need to be advocating for dialogue because this cannot continue. We're headed in a very, I think, negative direction right now that involves continued loss of life on all sides of innocent people. And I think that's unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, we want to be respectful of your time. And so, we could just keep talking.
We could go for hours.
And
Shanee is wonderful. She's brilliant. Yeah. She has so many experiences. There are obviously so many more things that we want to say and talk through. There's many more nuances to this topic, but we wanted to make sure that we at least had time to give her as much space to be able to go through this issue, give you an impression and understanding, however brief it may be, of what it's like to be an Israeli American, what October 7th meant to her, to Jews across this country, across the world, and also our kind of experience here at Harvard too.
Right.
So keep that in mind. We're going to talk a little bit more after
We're going to
this,
come in
but-
and add all the nuance now.
Yeah, now we're going to come in
really
and tell you what we
job.
really think.
Yeah.
but
Say one thing?
absolutely.
Yeah, because I was totally not nuanced until now. I just want to say, I know a lot of your viewership is not Jewish, and for those of you who are looking out for your Jewish friends and for your Israeli friends and standing up in the face of what is, again, has tremendous social costs, unfortunately, right now, thank you on behalf of the Alliance for Israel community, and we hope to see you at all of our events.
Amen. God bless you. Thanks for joining us, Shanee.
Thanks, Shanee.
I mean, how do you recover after that conversation?
It's pretty crazy, huh?
All right. So
Shanee's gone now.
Shanee is gone. As you can see, she had to run off to a meeting. She's a busy, busy lady.
Busy lady.
So it's amazing that
Very
she
grateful
took
for her
any time
time.
to be
Yeah,
able to do that.
absolutely.
And I hope that you guys can appreciate the perspective she shared. We tried to get as much of her just experience as possible.
Yeah.
As you noticed from that conversation, we didn't go into all the really in-depth politics and the history and the factual questions. I think the Israel-Palestine discussion, above all else, is a factual discussion. There's an aspect of it that's moral. I think there's a moral level to 100%, massive. But most of the time when I'm talking to people, they're like, there is a genocide happening. There's not a genocide happening, right? The people of Israel want this. The people of Israel don't want this. The people of Palestine want this. The people of Palestine. This is often the thing that I'm saying. And so we didn't get as much into that. So if you're frustrated by that, sorry, we didn't have time.
And keep listening because we're about to kind of get more into that.
We're about to. What were your initial reactions to listening to Shanee, though?
Yeah, I think as I was talking to you as I was using the bathroom, we spent a lot of time talking about October 7th, and I didn't necessarily think that that's where the conversation would dwell so much, but I think it just shows how important it is to Shanee and how important it is to the Jewish community and the Israeli community here. It's sort of like the Holocaust was. My perception being in Israel and talking with people was everyone had a family member who was involved in the Holocaust, either killed or survived.
It's founded by Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, truly. And I think that's kind of this moment for them is the modern day Holocaust moment. It is so important to kind of their identity and now the rise of anti-Semitism and all of that. And so I think that's probably why we talked a lot about it. There's obviously a ton more to talk about and we want to cover that now. But, that's why the conversation dwelled there. And especially, as both of us are personally involved in this now, that came about because of October 7th as well, and the backlash to it on Harvard's
That's
campus.
the main reasoning. I mean, before October 7th, I had views on Israel, and see, even to this day, even post October 7th, don't get me wrong, I care about Israel, and it became more of a priority because it was a priority to other people. Therefore, I would go out of my way for it. My stance on Israel, I've been pretty consistent in being supportive of Israel for American interest reasons.
Yeah, same.
And for the fact that I like the people, I like the place. And in terms of my priority list of issues, it's number 50.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just being honest with you, I understand as an Israeli American, it's going to be different in terms of priority.
Yeah.
For me as an American, and I think for most Americans, that is not an issue. This is not an issue that you should be spending all of your time online dwelling on, fighting people over, and all this other crap. We're going to talk about this. This is the biggest thing that's going to be a problem with this episode, is I know that there are people on the American right who are going to think, you went to Israel, you're bought and paid for.
Yeah.
You're friends with an Israeli, you're bought and paid for. You cared about being on the Alliance for Israel. Oh, my goodness, what a hack. Your dual loyalty. And it's that is in no way what has driven me towards this. What has driven me towards this is the fact that the left first responded to this crap, and then I had a stance on it, and I saw a community that was in need as a Christian, and I went on my way to support them. Right.
Yeah, kind of same. I mean, this is not a huge priority for me. I have mixed views about what Israel has done in the past. I think
everybody does.
Yeah, absolutely. But certainly, I mean, I will unabashedly say, and this might get me canceled, that I have zero problems identifying who is the good in the Middle East right now. Who is on the right side of history. It's going to piss y'all off. It's going to piss the left off. But I look around at all the Muslim countries that I've been to, generally not great countries. I'm not bashing the people. I'm bashing the government and the regimes. But I've been to quite a few, okay? I've traveled the world. I've been to many majority Muslim countries or even Islamic regime countries. And I have no problem looking at Israel and saying, like, you know what? I would rather have you guys control the entire Middle East than all of these places. Because you know what? At least as a Christian, as Mason was talking about with Shanee, I feel the freedom to go there. There's churches in Israel. You know how many churches there are in Saudi Arabia?
There's
zero.
I think there's
okay.
Like 5
there's
approved.
like no. I actually think there's zero, bro.
Okay, we can
check me, but
there
like
might be 5 approved by the state.
There's like
right?
less than 10. We'll just say that.
Who knows? There's definitely secret churches though, for sure.
Absolutely,
secret Christians.
But like, I went to a Christmas Eve service at a Protestant church,
Yeah.
an English-speaking service in Jerusalem, and I really don't think that would happen. Sorry to say, based off history and experience. If this was a Palestinian
Well, I mean, in
territory.
all fairness, you look at those countries, they're 99.9% Muslim.
Yeah.
Consistently. And then you look at Israel and you've got, I believe it's 75% Jewish, 20% Muslim, and then like 5% Christian.
Yeah.
And it is the only growing Christian population in the entire Middle East is in the state of Israel. But I think this is important as a qualifying point too. Like, as a Christian, I look at this issue and I see people who are suffering. That's the first impact. I think when you see starving children in Gaza because of horrible policies, decisions from the Israeli government, that I should be able to criticize that and say, as a Christian, that is wrong. You should be flooding the zone with aid, and if you're not doing that because you're trying to get back at the innocent people for the things that were done to you, which I understand as a human, after you get raided and have thousands of your people murdered in that brutal fashion, you don't want to do anything that you should. But as a Christian, we're called to still say you still have to go out of your way and support innocent life.
Certainly. And I mean, we heard that from Israelis on the ground, too.
Exactly.
We spoke with Israel Aid, and
we talked. We'll go through.
And they
all
were
of this,
very
absolutely.
critical of the Israeli government's policy.
Totally. But I think this is the important thing to mention before we really get into all of it, is that, like, as we're talking to the politics, and I've had this accusation made, this is a discussion we've had many times with people who disagree with us. It is not because we do not sympathize with the plights of innocent people who are caught up in this horrible conflict. It is that we are making a moral assessment and a factual assessment of what is actually happening on the ground. And our fundamental assumptions, I think this is something that I'm walking away with after the Israel trip, and you'll see this as we're talking through it, are that there is like a group of people within Palestine who have control, at least within Gaza, who have control of the governing mechanisms, who do not want to negotiate, who do not mean to preserve innocent life, who actually target innocent life out of their way, whose stated goal is the death of Israel and the death of Jews. And on the other side, you have a government system that mimics a lot of the Western civilizational structures that you're used to, that are actually, they have mechanisms to hold people to account for targeting of civilians. Because does that happen by the IDF? I'm sure it does. Absolutely. But there are mechanisms to hold them to account. And that there is also an intent, as you can hear from Shanee sitting here, there is an intent to have peace.
Yeah.
And I think that those voices like Shanee's, are far more predominant in Israeli society than in the Palestinian society. And that's my fundamental assumption going in, and you'll hear all those other things. I don't know if you have fundamental assumptions that you go into this conversation with.
Certainly that one. You know, you mentioned the check on the IDF. I think also, like, with certain policies that were pursued in this Hamas war, or whatever it's called, the Gazan war, I don't know what we're calling it. You know, there were mistakes made at an institutional level, right? Mason mentioned the kind of like cutting off aid for a certain point to try to, force a negotiation. Like, that was walked back, right? Like, there are mechanisms by which the Israeli government can say, like, oh, we made a mistake. Like, we're not doing that again. And let's review that policy decision, internally or with an outside body that kind of can speak into that. They're going to review the whole way that the war was conducted. I mean, this is a really, if we're going to talk about the Gazan war or whatever we're calling it, it's a very unconventional war. I think it's incredibly difficult for Westerners to fathom what it would be like to go into the Middle East. I mean, America did this in a way in Iraq and Afghanistan, and like, it didn't go so well. I mean, the American forces committed a lot of atrocities too, and are we going to say that we were intentionally committing genocide against the Iraqis? No, I don't think so. So it's interesting. Shanee said, like, it's interesting that the IDF gets criticized even more than the American military does, or Jewish survivors are doubted because they're Jewish. Like, those kind of questions are in the back of my mind too. But I think my fundamental assumption is, like, while yes, Israel has its problems, and even as I was there, I was like sometimes uncomfortable, with the way that the like democracy is being run, or I have questions about like the effort to keep a Jewish majority, which is so essential to Israel's existence. I get that, but it bothers me. It rubs me the wrong way because it isn't American, but my assumption is, with all that being said, I'm like, I have zero problems coming out and saying, like, all the problems with Israel, I'd still rather have them. I'd rather have a Tel Aviv there than a Baghdad, or I just, like, Tel Aviv is great, and Israel overall is as close to a Western country in the Middle East that we've seen ever.
And so there's a few layers to this, right? So these are our fundamental assumptions going in. Now, if you have different fundamental assumption, if your fundamental assumption is that the Israelis are driven to displace or kill the Palestinian people, if that is your fundamental assumption, that all of them, or at least the broad majority, and the government itself is doing that, you're going to have a very different interpretation of the facts that we're going to discuss. We're going to argue that I think those facts point to saying your assumptions are wrong. This is the reason why I still hold the assumptions that I do. But even as you're saying, though, like, it's an interesting point that, like, the conflict, it is a conflict for a reason. There are legitimate claims from each side in terms of to the lands, religious claims, people, historical, demographic.
We actually claims. Think that there are legitimate land claims on both sides.
I would say totally, absolutely. Yeah. And obviously, many people would disagree with that again because they look at it and they're like, you don't have a legitimate, you don't have this. But these are things that you've got to keep in the back of your mind as we're discussing it, that we have our own fundamental assumptions, and that doesn't mean that, like, you can then paint on from the fact that I've come to the conclusion on one of the assumptions that then when I'm talking to Israelis and they're talking about, like, the preeminency of Israel or, like, the Jewish people in the area, that it doesn't make me uncomfortable still as an American, right? For the exact same reasons you talked about before. The funny thing is, most of the people on the far right who I would think would really sympathize with that, actually, because they look at our country and they're like, that's the main problem. As soon as you start talking about that with the Jews, they're immediately like, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. And I think that stuff is annoying to me because I'm just like, it doesn't feel like it's really that many things are consistent with Israel.
Sure.
I think that's one of the frustrating things about this issue.
So the right,
like nobody's consistent. We're not. I don't feel like I'm even consistent sometimes with Israel.
So the right has a problem with like the Americans being diluted by immigrants, right?
That's what these same people who tend to be anti-Zionist, anti-Israel. That's often they look at Jews and they blame them for diluting all of these like Western countries. And there's this grand theory of what the Jews have been doing in the world, and that's what we're operating against. That's most of the people who will negatively comment on this video, if it actually gets seen by those people in the first place. That's oftentimes where they're coming from, where it's like you're either bought and paid for, right? Because there's this grand superstructure that's telling you to believe what you believe. And the funny thing is, like, that's in no way why I came to these. I wish I was getting paid. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, we got a trip to Israel. Awesome, right? Propaganda tour, an amazing experience. Does that mean that in any way, if anything, that it changes my view? I think sometimes seeing Israel in person makes me less pro-Israel.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, this was not a propaganda tour, guys. We went all over the country. You know, we could just quickly recap the trip a little bit.
We'll walk through it. How about we do that?
Yeah, let's do that. Then let's talk about the history of Israel.
Yep.
Then let's talk about current stuff.
Then we'll go into a little bit more current stuff.
Then we'll talk about government funding.
Yeah, we can talk about government funding. There's a lot on the table. There's a lot
to cover.
And you already saw we just had this splatter. There's a reason why we did the splatter to start. It's because we have a lot of thoughts that we want to jump out and say at the outset. But let's start. So we landed in Jerusalem with this group.
Oh, we're going to walk through it day by day?
So we land in Jerusalem with this group. I think it's important that we kind of talk through the different experiences. Yeah.
Sure. The group is made up of mostly, it's a mix. It's a mix of like Alliance for Israel board members like us, and then students who are from Harvard who are not supporters of Israel.
Yeah,
or
who are supporters,
who are at least open to going. I mean, right? Because that's
nobody's
one of the thresholds.
Truly anti-Israel will go to Israel because they have a certain view. They think it is committing genocide, and it's like, okay, if you think that it's committing genocide, then I think you're wrong, and you're never going to get to experience it firsthand. And when you talk to Israelis, you'll be disproved, but they won't come.
Yeah, but we went all over the country, so it's a mixed group. The purpose of the group is to have dialogue with all sides. We start off in Jerusalem. We go to the October 7th sites. We tour those.
Can we pause there for a second?
Sure.
Because I really want to talk about those. So Shanee is organizing this trip. She's running through everything. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to bring her on, because she can give you a good kind of overview of everything that was happening in Israel, and she obviously cares deeply about the country. Going to the October 7th sites, though. So, like, we drove down, literally first day we're there, we drove down to the border with Gaza. We drove along the border. We can see into Gaza, and we had different interpretations of what we saw.
Yeah, we did.
Which is somewhat funny. in the sense of like you can actually see firsthand how people experiencing things very differently. Because
Yeah.
Will looked over at it, and what do you think?
Well, you kept saying it's totally leveled.
Yeah,
It's
because
totally
I
leveled.
looked
was
over
like,
and I was like, there's a ton of that city is like we could see Gaza City. I was like, that place is rubble. There is concrete everywhere and buildings leaning against each other.
And I did not see that at all.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's very interesting.
I was like, dude, first of all, you can't see that. It's too far away.
Maybe
Second of
they're,
all,
like, putting up a screen for us.
The fact that like you can see building outlines clearly means that it's not totally leveled. Anyway, so we interpreted
but that's what I'm
it
saying.
differently,
But my point though is I think it's an instructive moment that like even when you're approaching the facts themselves, like we're seeing this, I think if you're in a certain mood where you're like, oh my gosh, all the things that have happened in Gaza are so evil and terrible, and you look out and you see that, you're confirmed, and you're looking for the rubble. But if you're in the mood, which we were often in that day, because it's October 7th day, where you're watching all of the things that have happened, like firsthand, you see the photos, you see videos, we go to the sites, we see the rubble that has happened.
You see the burned buildings, you see the bullet holes in like
you see everything
dwellings,
firsthand.
you see blood splatter.
When you're there in that place, then I think you look out and you see something different, because then you're suddenly like, well, you're starting to see it through the lens of we've been attacked and now we're responding. And that's the interesting thing of often these facts are viewed through whatever mood you happen to be in.
Sure.
And I noticed this on the trip. If I was like in the mood that was like, wow, all the things that are happening in Israel, I'm kind of uncomfortable with. And then somebody else was like, wow, all of these atrocities are so terrible that have happened on October 7th or against the people of Israel generally from the Second Intifada when they're blowing themselves up on buses in Israel, right? If that's your mood and I'm here and we talk, we often disagree a lot.
Yeah.
And we'd fluctuate back and forth. It was a very interesting thing.
Yeah. I would say overall my experience on that day, and we've talked about October 7th a lot, so I don't want to just keep harping on it, but I was pretty upset. You know, I was very disturbed by the atrocities committed. I thought, like, this is just evil in its purest form. I mean, terrorism is evil, I think. These are not freedom fighters. These are evil people.
What they did, absolutely.
Yeah.
Without mitigation.
With joy and with laughter and celebration. It's disgusting. So that was my mood after that day.
I do want to say, like, oh my gosh, some of the stories we saw. I mean, I told the story at the October 7th memorial last year that we had at Harvard of Irene and Netta. Irene and Netta are people that are our age. They're engaged, fiancés that were living in Kfar Aza, one of the kibbutzes that are the kibbutzim, I guess is the right way to describe it. It's like a little community that's right on the border of Gaza. They were like only a few miles away. They used to have very good relations with the Gazan people until Hamas took power and they shut it all down and they
Hamas
prepared.
Shut it down.
Yeah, Hamas shut down any sort of communication back and
with
forth.
Jews.
And these are some of the most liberal people in Israel, by the way. The kibbutzim, these people, they're socialists. They're like we should all live kumbaya, and like they're not just like, many of them are like two-state solution, if not like we can all have a pluralist state. Like they're super liberal.
Yeah.
And that morning, that row of houses, we got to walk through it, and I got to see the house of Irene and Netta in shambles. You could see past explosions all around. You can see the rubble. Everything is kept as it was. You walk into those houses, you can see their shampoo bottles. You can see the beds propped up against the wall, trying to stop people from getting in. These people are our age, trying to stop them. You know they get murdered in those rooms. And Irene and Netta's story, Irene and Netta, they're hiding in that room, and a grenade gets thrown into the shelter that they're in, and Netta throws himself on top of it, kills him in the process, saves Irene's life, and the terrorists think that that's it because they see this dead body that's there, and they move on.
Wow.
And Irene survives. Irene survives. Yeah. She runs when they kind of move somewhere else. She runs and hides in a different corner of the house. And hearing that story and knowing she's sitting there, she's hiding for the next 10 hours watching her fiance's body lifeless on the ground. And that's the place that it happened. I got to stand there. I got to see the bullet holes. It is incredible.
Yeah.
That's what we experienced.
Yeah, and I was most moved probably by the film festival because there's a lot of people who died there, and they have pictures of them and a little bio of them, and I was just like, wow. First of all, I was maybe, I don't know if this is morbid or not, but I was quite taken by some of the photos because these young women are like beautiful, and I'd be like, wow, I'd be so excited to go talk to you at a bar.
Oh, yeah.
And now I'm reading about your life and how you tragically died here, and then I think also, like I shared with Shanee, just hearing the rape testimonies. We stood by, was it the blue tent?
It's a white tent.
The white tent, where a lot of the rapes happened, And we heard one about they took her boyfriend, they took her, and they pinned the boyfriend down with a gun in his mouth. While how many raped him? Like 19?
Yeah.
It was over a dozen raped this girl while the boyfriend watched. And if she tried to move, they would stab her in the back with a knife to keep her from moving. And they just raped her over and over again. And then the final guy finished and smiled at her and said, "Enjoy." And I just think that really fired me up. I mean, that fired me up to the point where I was like, honestly, this is really bad to say, but just being honest, if I was an IDF soldier, or I'm glad that I'm not, because I think I would have a very hard time.
And that's one of the things.
Not going in there and being full auto,
and
rapid fire.
This is the part of the source of a lot of the problems with the IDF in Gaza is that soldiers know personally those women. They know personally those men, brothers, sisters.
Yeah.
And that is a really hard thing to maintain discipline with.
Yeah. It's very hard.
I going through that experience on October 7th day, the reason why I really wanted to make sure we talked about it again, because it was very personal, getting to see those cars, going to the car graveyard, seeing thousands of cars, the bullet holes, the burnt out, rusted metal, hearing the stories of so many different individuals, and then looking across the way and seeing Gaza. It hit home to me how broken our world is, and that kind of fallout line that war never changes, that war is terrible, that war is an evil thing, that I think that the natural reaction of all people to that sort of terror, and walking through Gaza and hearing and seeing those stories, I think it would have evoked the same reaction of these are terrible things that have happened.
Yep.
And I think that the assessment then, this is why these debates matter about the assessment of why this stuff happens. It's important because that might prevent it from happening in the future. But two other things to mention that were interesting with being there at that border. We got to see the drones that were flying above Gaza and taking photos, you could hear them. And then also it looked like, I'm not 100% certain, that there was an explosion in Gaza while we were nearby.
Yeah, it did.
And so that was sobering to be I'm just on a tour. Right.
Yeah.
And there is still they're still fighting. There's still conflict going on around.
Yeah. That was only part of the trip, though.
Of course.
The broader trip, we went, I don't know if it was the next day, but we went over into the West Bank. We talked to Palestinians there. We went into Area A, Area C. We couldn't go into Area A because of some people on the trip, and also just it was
no.
dangerous.
Actually, when we were in, there's three different areas. We should just clarify this. There's Area A, which is Palestinian Authority controlled, so it's just Palestinians that are allowed there,
civil and military.
Israelis, you'll see there are signs going into any area A spot do not go here, we cannot protect you, you will be physically hurt, because this often happens. There's a very famous incident of this happening where an Israeli accidentally drives into an Area A and they get lynched by a mob of Palestinians. That does happen. And so oftentimes it's jarring to see those signs as you're driving by. Then Area B is an area that's under Israeli authority, Israeli military authority, but it's a place where there are Israelis and Palestinians that transit.
Palestinians have civil control, Israelis have military.
Exactly. And then Area C is both just military and civil control for Israel.
Yeah, and this is from the Oslo Accords.
Yes, it's from the Oslo Accords back in the 90s. And we went to Area B because we were meeting with Palestinians who wanted to come and meet with us and talk and share their perspective. Yeah. So we met with several people. We can't share identities because it was all off the record. But we got to meet with, I think this is okay to say, a member of the
Fatah.
Fatah. Yeah, I don't know how to fully say their name correctly.
Yep.
It's one of the parties that's in control of the West Bank.
Yep.
At least they have some larger say in the West Bank. There's kind of a coalition government these days, it sounds like.
Yeah. They're part of the PLO.
Yeah,
they're like
they have an interesting network. They're
Yeah.
separate from Hamas. They are rivals with Hamas in many ways. Hamas's goal is the complete conquest of Israel. Fatah's is the same, just in different ways. And by different ways, I mean slightly less militaristic, because they also sponsor, they have something called Pay to Slay. This is through the Palestinian Authority, which they also support. And that's basically if you go and blow yourself up in Israel, your family will be provided for the rest of your life.
And Fatah does do that. And we asked him directly, and he gave us a very...
It's part of resistance for them.
...unconvincing explanation of why that was totally legitimate.
No, it's part of...
But anyway, we met with him, and we met with another guy who we can say...
You can't... I wouldn't say names. It was just we met with a tour guide.
Yeah, and he runs an organization that tries to bring together... participates in an organization that tries to bring together Palestinians in the West Bank and Israelis to have dialogue together. and he was great. I mean, he was the most
He's the most winsome.
Yeah, most winsome. Also, kind of, I could empathize with him the most, I think.
Well, and remember what my question was, though. I was like, I think that if most Palestinians held the view that you hold, that you espouse right today, and you're willing to meet with us, talk with us, and also say that you believe in trying to have a two-state and understand the Israelis, I think if most Palestinians agree with that, amen. I would have very different views about the conflict. I would have incredibly different views.
Sure.
But I'm not convinced that's true.
Sure. Yeah. So anyway, we went into the West Bank. We also went to both the borders of Syria and Lebanon and toured those.
That was amazing.
Got to go on the Golan Heights.
Driving along, we were in Jeeps driving along the border of Syria.
Yeah.
And we could see into Syria.
Yeah.
And got like a high level breakdown.
We did.
From like basically what felt like Israeli intelligence, essentially, like on understanding the region.
No.
That was so incredible.
Yeah, the guy we met with is actually, he works in civil affairs. So he kind of goes into Syria, manages different agents over there, and has done that for many years. So that was really interesting. We got to see all the defense networks that Israel has on the Syrian border to prevent another invasion. You really get a sense, I think, being in Israel about how imminent some of the threats are and have historically been. And it's like, it's like 2 hours from Jerusalem or 2 hours
right
from
there.
Tel Aviv. It's all very close.
I mean, and when we talked with an expert on Hezbollah, which is it's a terrorist organization largely based out of Lebanon, she was saying, like, up until October 7th, I mean, they would see literally like Hezbollah soldiers on the hills right by the border. Like there's border wall, there's Israeli house right here, there's Lebanese house, and there's you can see the Hezbollah like flag, armband wearers, headband wearers, all there with their guns, everything. Like they'd see them occasionally.
Yeah.
Hello. So we're currently out at the Lebanese border right now. I'm surrounded by a bunch of dumpsters. You can see over here, though, there's a mushroom factory here, our bus, and then there's the Lebanese border. My group is also over there talking to a lady right now who does a bunch of work on Hezbollah. She's an expert on them. I'm about to go rejoin them, but before that, I wanted to at least kind of mark the occasion because it's such an interesting place to be. In the far north of Israel, right at the border with Lebanon, close to Hezbollah forces, within just a few seconds striking distance from most of the 1,000 rockets that they're expected to have. This population area was entirely evacuated for the last 2 years during the war. Now, because there's a ceasefire and seemingly peace, people have been able to move back. About 60% of the population has returned. But you can still see up until this point, you can see beyond there's a UN observation station where they watch the border, and they're basically just taking a look out for, hey, what happens if this war restarts? If Hezbollah starts getting close to the border again and trying to invade or preparing rocket launches, things like that. This place can go up in smoke any given moment. It's pretty crazy.
Training net right on the UN.
Yeah, right near
Security.
the UN sites, because they're supposed to maintain things, but the UN does nothing.
Yeah.
And like that's one of the things that I'd also say is that like the UN operates on all of these borders and has different degrees of efficacy in the sense of doing very little, it appears, to the point that Israel now has changed tactics. That's why there are more Israeli presences on the Lebanese side of the border, on the Syrian side of the border now, and now on the Gazan side of the border, because they don't want they need more of a buffer zone military-wise. Between an attack from an enemy force, a guerrilla force, and the civilian population.
Yeah, I think, while it doesn't sit well with me initially to think of Israel kind of occupying, the IDF occupying, you'll hear this a lot, like Lebanon now and Syria and the West Bank and Gaza. Israel's perspective on that is like, well, we've been invaded before, and so it's kind of like it's an advanced warning, right? Like, this is a very common military tactic. You set up a listening post, observation post that's supposed to give like your patrol base at the platoon level just an advanced warning. And that's really what Israel is like doing in the settlements in the West Bank, now in the north of Gaza, and in Syria and in Lebanon. So when you look at it from a security posture, it makes a lot of sense. I think geopolitically, it complicates the situation. It fuels the radicalization. It fuels these narratives of like Israel is just looking to expand its territory. But I think if you zoom out a little bit and look at like, well, the threat has historically, this is undeniable. It's historically been a real threat from all sides. And now it's like, well, we have to have these buffers.
I mean, the lady that we're meeting with had this great line that I thought was very convincing. She was like, listen, if we're going to win the PR war on this, it's going to cost more of our lives. And she was like, and simply put, I prefer to live. And I was like, that's a very good explanation of what their philosophy is. Like, the Israelis, they do care about the PR to the extent that, like, you've got to make sure that people aren't completely convinced of the alternative. But clearly, there's a lot of people out there who are convinced of the alternative already. Yeah. And if you let them dictate your actions, most of them don't care about Israel in the first place. Yeah. And so I've seen this a million times. This is often my critique of the left. Like, they come into institutions and they go, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this to be able to be good. And yes, if you trying to do all those things sinks the institution because it literally doesn't work, so be it. It was meant to sink anyway. Yeah. And I look at that and I'm like, that's not tenable to me.
I also think a problem that I have with kind of like, I think that the left generally has a quite idealistic view of humanity. Yeah. And again, I'm probably gonna get in so much trouble for saying this, but of Muslim societies, I think that unfortunately, a lot, not all of them, but a lot of Muslim cultures really do not like Jews. And so, yes, like it sucks that Israel has to do this, and I would prefer that they didn't. But we do not live in a world of peace. Yes. Peace is a myth. Peace in our time is a lie. Like we will probably never have peace.
There will always be war. That's a conservative assumption, yes.
Yes. And so I just think like that's why I look at it from a security standpoint. That like, yeah, Israel, unfortunately, they're not going to win the PR war because they do not live with neighbors right now, and this is part of the way forward, I think, who want them there, who want to normalize relationships with them.
And I think this is an important thing on when we're discussing Islam, because I know that I've been debating this with one of my Jewish, more secular friends recently who's been getting upset with me because he's like, no, Islam isn't that way, you're just like listening to too many things online. Listen, sure. I don't think we need to, on this podcast, try to prove the general elements of faith, whatever. Let's just pause and take a look at this specific conflict and the conflict itself. We met with a former hostage, okay? We're not going to go into like all the details about him. It was very interesting to hear his experience. But one of the things that he shared with us, and he spent a lot of time, he spent hundreds of days in Gaza, in captivity, alone, held by terrorists.
In tunnels.
And he talked with them. He talked with them about the politics of them because he was alone with them this entire time. And they would talk with him. They treat him like a dog, quite literally, starve him. All of these other things. We can take you through it. They were all subsisting on UN-provided food, naturally, in those tunnels. But he talked with them about politics, and he tried to say, like, how can we divide the land? Because obviously this guy comes from like a more liberal, out there family, more secular Jew. And
he was captured at the Nova Festival.
Yeah, he's captured at the Nova Festival. And they look at him every time, and they laugh, and they go, you think this is about the land? You think it's about land? This has nothing to do with the land. This is religious. This is my religion. My religion tells me I kill you. Therefore, I kill you. And that's the problem. That's the issue that we're dealing with fundamentally. If it was actually about the land, if it was actually about just the demographics and all these other things, there is a way to negotiate through these things. And in all fairness, I look over, and one of the big things we talked about when we were discussing the West Bank, and I don't think there's moral equivalence in terms of the atrocities that are being perpetrated by Hamas, but there's also a lot of issues with like settlers from Israel going over and living now in the West Bank. And they call them settlers because there's open land. Open land, it's cheap. Many people go there because it's cheap. And they put down houses, and they start constructing communities, and they build them right across from the Palestinian ones in the West Bank. Yeah. But many of those also have a biblical, again, religious, messianic view that this is their land. Right. And that's hard to negotiate with.
Complicates the picture a lot.
It's hard to negotiate with because clearly there's no negotiation. Right? And I think that's like when you see that from the Israeli side, that's the stuff that I'm saying. When I go to Israel and I get less pro-Israel, seeing that stuff makes me less pro-Israel.
Totally. Yep. That made me question a lot as well, seeing the settlements over there and hearing, because it's a very small minority of settlers, but there is settler violence as well that we heard about, and that is true. That Israel needs to crack down on for sure.
And there's also a lot of violence against the settlers, just to note. Like literally, there was two people who were killed on the road that we were on 2 hours afterwards. Yeah. Literally, we drove right by the spot 2 hours later. Car rams into another car. Yeah. Guy gets out and stabs 2 people to death.
I think one little microcosm of the trip that I'll also share that kind of I alluded to when Shanee was on, that, grateful that Israel controls the land as a Christian, because I can go to these sites. I think I also talked about it a little bit in the Christmas episode, the Christmas special, that we can just be filming in public without any fear. We were talking about Christ without any fear. In public. in public. We can proselytize without fear. And like, you know, you contrast that with the day that we went to the Alaska Mosque. And we went to the Temple Mount, and we had to go through security, and we were told that we couldn't pray up there.
You can't pray. You can't have any religious symbols.
Our Jewish friends had to cover up
pause and explain what the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Okay, great. But just quickly, our Jewish friends had to cover up their kippahs. Some of them,
everything.
Yeah,
the kippahs, everything. But basically, the
no
reason
Jewish symbols.
This is the Temple Mount. So for Christians out there, when we think of like the temple and the place that Jesus went and often preached and everything like that, this is where the temple was for the Jewish faith. It's literally the holiest site in the Jewish faith. It's where the Holy of Holies, where God himself, the presence of God was. The rock that's in there and that's where the Holy of Holies is also believed to be where the creation of man occurred. Adam came from that rock, from that dirt, because he's made from the soil, right? And the binding of Isaac, where Abraham brings up his son, binds him to that rock, and almost sacrifices him, but God stops him and gives a substitution for his sins, for his wrongs, which we think is ultimately Jesus. But you go to that place, it is the holiest site you could possibly think of. The Muslims, going back to the 700s, have just rewritten and said, because there was a political disagreement, there was a bit of a divide between the kingdoms, and some of the people in one of the kingdoms couldn't get access to Mecca.
Yeah, between the caliphs.
And so because of that, they were like, well, there's this one passage about Muhammad's night journey, right, where he goes off to some city. Let's say it's Jerusalem. Yeah. Let's say that he goes from this rock, the same rock that now is also incredibly important in the Jewish faith and Christian faith, and that he goes up and talks with God there, and then from there he walks down south and he prays towards Mecca for the first time. And that's where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is where he prayed for the first time. The Dome of the Rock, which is the big golden dome, if you ever see it, is right over the top of the rock where Adam was created, the Holy of Holies, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going to. It's controlled by the Muslims. It's controlled by the Sheikh.
It is. It's controlled by the Muslims now.
Even though it's under Israeli, it's like under, in their view, under Israeli occupation, but like it's Israeli land now.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we're obviously giving quite an uncharitable view of Islam.
But there were great people that we met too.
For sure. But I will just say, like, well, yeah, it's because we believe that this is a false religion. You know,
I mean,
like, and it is all made up, and it is all like Muhammad's like, we could go into that on a later episode, but
it shouldn't be dangerous to say that, but it actually is dangerous.
There is quite a lot of historical problems with some of the Muslim narratives.
It's funny because I feel fearful saying that.
I don't.
I know you're stronger and more courageous, but I feel more fearful saying that publicly than I do about like any other religion that I also believe to be false, because I know, and this is part of the problem that we're discussing, that there are so many radical elements out there to that religion that will come after you, whether it be online or in person, for saying these things. And this is the problem that we're dealing with, is if you cannot negotiate, if you cannot have a fundamental belief in religious freedom and tolerance, right? And there's a common understanding of that among Christians and Jews, and it's really hard to get there with Islam. And this is one of the things that one of the Nova Festival survivors was talking to us about when we met with him. He was saying, oh, like, we need to go back. Like, it's really important that Christians realize why, like, we try to work with them often is because we often have very similar values on these questions.
Yeah, he did say that.
And that's true. I agree with that. Yeah. Does that mean that I think as a Christian you have a moral imperative to the state of Israel? No.
No. But yeah, I was just sharing that as kind of a microcosm. It struck me as a big difference between, like, we could go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we could go to midnight service at Christ Church, a Protestant Anglican church there, without any fear, and without any sort of like hesitancy about praying or worshiping in public. But that was not the case on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I think, you know, one Palestinian Jerusalemite that we spoke to shared with us how he thinks, you know, I pushed him on this a little bit. Like he painted a very rosy picture of what a Palestinian one state would look like. Yeah. And I questioned him, like, well, where has that existed in history? You know, he mentioned the Ottoman Empire, which I think is a misconception about if you just understand how the Ottoman Empire functioned, like
as a pluralist empire.
Yeah, it really wasn't.
It was more secularized because of that.
Yeah, but it wasn't fully pluralistic. There was not equal rights to practice religion. Like, they were subjugated still under that regime. And I pushed him on that. Like, where has this ever existed where there's been an Islamic regime. And there hasn't been in all of history.
Well,
and I don't think there would be.
I would argue that there are some cases of more secular forms of Islam. This is where I will give more ground here. I do think that there are secular forms of Islam. You can go to a place like Malaysia, right? And they actually will allow for other groups, but you'll see closer to what it looks like. You're not allowed to proselytize in Malaysia to Malaysian Muslims. You're not allowed to proselytize. That's a line that they draw, and you'll get in big trouble if you do that. You can be Chinese and be Christian. That's completely fine, but don't touch the Malaysian Muslims. So they have like different policies based upon the country, but I would argue that that's often because they're pluralist societies, and when they're pluralist, they functionally, as a pragmatic matter, have to be more like that to not have rebellion.
Okay, yeah, I'll accept that. Sure.
When you have a place that's 99% Muslim, they provide no protections.
Probably not going to happen in a Palestinian one state.
So we spend all this time, we go to the borders, we meet with all these different people, we meet with Palestinians. I think the one thing that would be interesting to include here too when we're talking about Palestine is understanding of like when discuss with them the typical way it's described, this is why it's so compelling, I think, to hear the stories of the Palestinians is like, man, it sounds miserable to live the way that they're living.
Yeah,
like there are checkpoints, military checkpoints that go between anywhere that are not always open, that slow down everything. There's random guard checks. You get profiled in every possible way. You're stateless.
And those guard checks are shut down on Shabbat and Jewish holidays,
so you can't really
which
travel.
Is horrible.
You're stateless, meaning oftentimes these people don't have passports. They can't go anywhere. They can't get into Jordan, which is the only other way to the right. They can't go to the left, which is Israel.
And Jordan has stopped giving Palestinians passports.
Yeah, because they also don't want more Palestinians to come into Jordan. And so you end up with a situation where there are people who are just stranded here. They have like basically it feels like no prospects into the future, and they're all living miserable lives. And so this is the argument that often my Palestinian friends will make. They'll be like, this is why they're radicalized. It's because of the way that you treated them. And the answer is like, I think that there are elements of that are 100% true. I think that the Israeli government has done things that are wrong. But like, that's failing to understand that like every government around Israel has also done this stuff, and so it might be helpful to then jump back and now get into history to be able to discuss it. You want to talk history a little bit?
Yeah, let's do it.
We're going to give you a really brief rundown on the history because I think it's important also when we get into what we're going to talk about right afterwards, which is the Israeli-American relationship, because we've just gone through this big trip. We spent 8 days in Israel. We went over all of the country. We got to see the secular side in Tel Aviv. We got to see the very religious, cultural side in Jerusalem. We got to go to the borders of all these different countries. There was so much that we got exposure to. There's a lot to talk about there, but we can't spend all the time in the world. We don't want to waste all of your time just going through that stuff. So brief rundown on some of the history before we get into the American politics. Israel's founded fundamentally as a state, first off, right after the Holocaust and World War II, okay? You have a complete displacement of the Jewish population in Europe where they feel completely betrayed by like all of their major governments. Europe doesn't feel like home to them. All of their whole families that have been decimated have 1 or 2 people left, communities that are leveled. And those people basically say, and this is something we heard in the Holocaust Museum there in Jerusalem, like either you send us to our actual homeland to call our own because we're not doing this ever again, or we're gonna go back to the gas chambers because just let us die because frankly there's no point to keep going. We need a homeland.
Now, there had been a Zionist movement before that as well.
And so before this point, leading up to this point, there are about 400,000 Jews. I believe it is like 200, 300,000 Jews who are already in the Holy Land. And this is part of an agreement that's made initially with, I believe it's the Ottomans and the British, about Jewish immigration into the land of Israel, where they buy tracts of land. All of this is facilitated often by Arabs who sell it to them, and like the Palestinians who are living there, even though the Palestinians there aren't necessarily calling themselves Palestinian at the time, they're thinking of themselves, at least according to some historical records, as like, I'm Lebanese Palestinian, I'm Syrian Palestinian, I'm Jordanian Palestinian, even though Jordanian is really the best term for it because really that whole area is Transjordan. It's contrived. So there's all sorts of identities that are there within that region, and you can get more into the history based upon whoever you talk to. But the biggest thing to understand is that there's a wave then of immigration of Jews post-Holocaust that show up in the land or buying this area, and the Brits do what they always do, which is, listen, we can't figure out how to make this division work well, so we're just going to say, you guys go here, you guys go there, have fun. And
they tried to do that.
And they tried to do that, and in 1948, when they do that, as soon as day one, the state of Israel is declared, and all of these other pieces of land are supposed to be part of either like Transjordan or Lebanon, Syria, whatever. Palestine, as it's understood, all those territories invade. All of the countries around Egypt, Lebanon, Syria.
Well, because
invade immediately to Israel.
Israel accepts the 1948 proposed borders.
And they do not.
The Palestinians do not.
They do not, because they do not believe in the existence of a Jewish state.
Yeah.
They also don't trust the Jews. There's a lot of bad blood between those communities by this point. There's a lot of violence that have precipitated this.
Yeah.
And they invade and aren't willing to accept the territory that they have, but they lose. And they lose, and they get held back to... there's a line that's pretty close to where their original boundaries were supposed to be, and so they hold that until...
Called the Green Line.
Yes. Yeah. Until the 67 War, which is often referred to as the Six-Day War. It was miraculous. Again, those Arab countries do the same thing as before. Surprise attack, invasion into Israel. Yet again, they lose, and this time it's a stunning defeat. They lose even more land. Israel pushes much further, but gives some of it back.
Israel controls, like all the Sinai Peninsula.
Takes a huge chunk of land, gives a good portion of it back, though, and then takes Jerusalem. Then again, there's another war, another surprise attack by the Arab countries in 73, and they lose finally after that. And then there's the peace accords with Carter and everything, and they're like, okay, we can
Jordan.
No, between Egypt and Israel.
Egypt and Israel.
And so it's finally.
But there is peace with Jordan today.
Now there is peace finally. There's relative peace with all of these countries. But the reason why it's important to understand this. Who's brokering that peace in the 70s? Us.
U.S.
We're brokering that peace.
Right.
In 1948, when the nation's starting off, we're one of the major groups that advocates for it and stamps Israel's existence, right?
Yeah.
That rubber stamps it. And then going forward, too, we weren't necessarily within the Cold War. It was kind of hard. That some of the alliances weren't very clear. But over time, things kind of sorted themselves out where the Arab nations were more associated with the Soviet communist regime, and the capitalist nations, the West, was more associated with Israel.
Yeah.
And that has kind of been consistent over the last few decades. And you get to see that now often in our relationship, and that's what it was up to this point. There's a lot of tentativeness because of the claims over all these lands, because there's so many wars, because there's so many different boundaries to draw. Here's where Palestine is. Here's where Israel is. There is no Palestine. There is no Israel. All that stuff has caused a lot of chaos for American politicians who enter that stuff, because enter the area because they're like, oh my gosh, this is too much.
Yeah,
right.
It is a lot.
But with that as a full background, that is a lot of background. It was not perfect for my Israeli friends out there. They'll be pissed that I said something wrong. For my Palestinian friends, I'm sure they'll be pissed that I said some of the things I said.
Yeah.
But this leads us into the American-Israeli discussion.
Yes, it does. Though, can I just caveat that
Sure.
that an important trend, is that Israel has had more land than it has right now, and it has given a lot back.
The entire Sinai Peninsula it gave back, which is a huge tract of land, worthless land, but a huge tract.
Land for peace, right? They wanted peace in the region, so they gave the land back. And again, they made concessions
and
during the Oslo Accords.
This is an important thing. In 2005, they pull out of Gaza too, fully. They actually there was 10,000 Jews, I believe it is, who are living within that area of traditional
the IDF
Gaza.
Goes in and pulls them
they
out.
pull out. They go in and forcibly remove Jews. This is a very visceral memory for Israelis. They forcibly remove them and bring them back to the country because they're like, we're finally going to have peace here.
Yeah.
We're going to have peace. We're not going to have our soldiers in Gaza. And Hamas wins the elections the next year, never holds an election ever again, and prepares for an invasion.
Yeah. So you laid out a little bit of the historical ties between America and Israel. I think another important one that's just very practical. We have a ton of money invested in Israel, and we benefit a lot. Israel considers itself it's a startup nation. It's the highest entrepreneur per capita and successful startups per capita in the world.
And we got to meet with a very successful company.
Very successful.
That's based out of the U.S.
That is based out of the U.S.
So taxed here.
Yes, so all of the Israeli startups, their primary goal is to exit into the United States market, is to be listed on our stock exchange, not the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, or to be acquired by U.S. companies.
Because we're where the money is. And
we're where the money is, and also these are great tech companies.
And they produce a lot of money for us.
Israel started out, right, producing a lot of defense, obviously, and aerospace tech, but now they're into more software and IT.
Yeah.
And it is a very successful startup nation. And we have a lot of economic ties. And we asked the guy, he shared with us after October 7th, you know what happened? You think about all this BDS stuff, and I assumed that there would be a bit of they're over leveraged in America. America's not, it's a risky place to be invested in as an Israelite, right? And he's like, no, actually the opposite's true. After October 7th, like more money came into Israel, like not defense money, okay? Get me right, but like investments into these tech startups. More companies are getting acquired.
They're incredibly effective and they're good at what they do. I mean, the biggest thing to understand here is that often online you hear this whole stuff of like, oh, like I can't believe this happened. Give another $1 trillion to Israel. It's a funny joke. I actually think it's hilarious. But it's also funny in part to me because it's not like it doesn't make any actual sense in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. Like Israel as a nation, we send $4 billion to typically in terms of military aid support per year. I think it fluctuated, went higher during the war. But even so, that's 0.06% of the federal budget. In return from them, we get billions and billions. Depending upon the estimate, it's upwards of $40 billion of return on our investment. Because all of that money that we send to them, all the military aid, there's ties that you have to buy from American companies in order to make things happen. And these companies, too, that they're creating and starting in the U.S. pay huge amounts of U.S. taxes. And so they ultimately pay a massive amount. And this should be unsurprising, again, for my far-right friends out there who are like, I can't stand Israel. It's so evil that they control the world and all these other things, and they are using everything in America. Like, how are they able to do all of this stuff? And I'm like, you guys understand better than any other people. And maybe you're a little bit too crazy on this. I wouldn't actually give you full credence, but like a lot of these people come from cultures that emphasize education, okay?
Yeah.
So Ashkenazi Jews have an IQ average of 115, which is an incredible average IQ to have, okay? Sure. And if that's the case in Israel, that means they have a lot of people who are standard deviations moving out the tails. Brilliant. And we got to see that.
We did.
We do.
And they also all have obligatory service.
Yes, military service.
And this kind of, they start young, they're collaborative, they work together, and it leads to like a very entrepreneurial society that benefits them and also us. I think it's the same kind of idea of like a Silicon bubble, right? Like all of these major tech companies start in the Silicon Valley. It's kind of the same thing that we have happening in Tel Aviv. It shouldn't be like an immediate red flag that like, oh, they're controlling a lot. San Francisco controls a lot of our economy too. California controls a lot of our economy too.
If anything, we control their economy is really what happens.
I guess so.
They're incredibly dependent on us.
They are very dependent on us.
It's actually a really big risk for them because that might be sustainable.
But they don't really see it as a risk. They don't see it as a risk.
Well, I think that's not true. I think they do see it as a risk. I do think that they're trying to become more independent. It's just hard because they don't have the resources for that.
I think the startup guys we talk to and the venture capitalists that we talk to do not see it as, they don't see, money is going to follow money, brother. Money is going to follow money. And if Israel's popping out these like crazy startups, these $1 billion startups.
You would think that's true, but I don't think that's how politics works. This is my thing. This is why I will take a different approach here. As much as I think the people who listen to this who are not pro-Israel are going to be annoyed to hell. They're probably not going to make it to the point of being able to get to this place in the podcast because of how frustrating it is to hear us talk so lovingly of the country. But
let's bash on it for a little bit.
Well, yeah, I want to pause for a second and just say, like, as an American, my gosh, like I have a very different approach to this issue. There are Christians out there, they're called dispensationalists, who view Israel as like absolutely critical. We don't need to go into all the basics of their belief, but like they view Israel as absolutely critical to our faith. Okay, like literally the state of Israel as a creation is part of the end times, right? And I'm like,
Christ's return is tied to Jerusalem.
I think that's nutso. I think it sounds bad to people who aren't like within the religious circles. And don't get me wrong, I can sympathize a little bit more with those interpretations because I have the faith. But I think that's a misinterpretation of the faith regardless. And because of that, that's not why I land on all this stuff. I land on this stuff as a pure pragmatic matter of saying, I think that this is right. And even if I have to be that one guy in the meme who stands in front of 1 million people in my generation who are going, you're controlled by the Jews, you're bought and paid for, all this other stuff. And I have to be like, listen, you guys are just freaking wrong. I'll be that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll be that guy too. And I see it as a mutually beneficial relationship, I think there's without a doubt benefits. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. I keep tying it back to Silicon Valley because that's a helpful analogy for me as a conservative, right? Like all of my money is going to these like tech startup founders who are really liberal and kind of wacky and people who I disagree with. But
totally,
at the end of the day, if they're making a good product, that's where the money's going to go.
We met with some libs in Israel.
Yeah, we did.
There aren't libs in Palestine, I'll tell you that. And
there's not.
the libs that we met with in Israel, I was like, I'm reminded why it's just so frustrating. This is the most frustrating part, I think, about working with liberals
Supreme
in
Court
Israel.
Justice?
Yeah, we met with some people that were really
influential.
We shouldn't go through specifics, but we met with some influential, very important people in that area.
We did.
And
why can't we go into specifics? That seems kind of sketchy.
It's supposed to be off the record.
Okay, that's why we're not going to specifics.
Yeah, it was supposed to, like when we met with them, they said that oh, this is off the record. We want to be able to talk candidly with you.
Yeah. But our massive podcast platform is not what they had in mind.
No, it's definitely not. The millions of people who will see this.
Yeah.
No, my main thing is that you listen to them talk through stuff, and it's frustrating to me because I'm like, you guys are able to understand the importance of defense here in Israel and having an identity as a nation and as people, and then Jews across, so many of these liberal Jews who are coming from Israel still don't have that sense at all in other places, and I really wish that they could understand that better.
Sure.
And that's frustrating to me.
Yeah.
That's a massive frustration.
Should we address APAC?
Oh yeah, I mean we're getting paid by them for this.
Yeah, APAC's paying for this episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you dearly. You can send $7,000 to each of our bank accounts.
Yeah, for our future campaigns.
Yes,
$7,500.
I mean, it's going to make such a huge difference. You see these numbers; they got paid $50,000 for their campaign. That must have made a huge difference.
Yeah.
I mean, my gosh.
Actually, it doesn't. What's the stat, Mason? I'm getting fidgety. Pull out the stats.
I mean, no, the whole point isn't to say this other stuff. I don't even care about the stats.
I can't get comfortable on this dang couch, bro.
You don't like this?
No.
This couch? No, I want to make fun of it more than anything because, listen, I think it's hilarious. There are so many people who pour money into politics. There are billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in our politics. Israel lobbying makes up, I think, 100 million max of it.
Sure.
And that's just the Israel side. There is a lot of lobbying from the other side too.
Yeah.
And so
Qatar,
it goes
right?
back and forth, and that's across multiple election campaigns, all these other things like this.
I mean, we should be wary of campaign contributions from other countries.
Absolutely. I think these should be better regulated. They should be more. There should be more transparency. I'm actually very much in favor of campaign contribution regulations,
finance reform,
generally speaking.
Yeah.
But I think it's a moronic view, and people are going to get upset with me here. But they're all going to be upset already, so it doesn't really matter. No. To look at people and be like, you got $10,000 from AIPAC? Wow, you're bought and paid for and are sending billions of dollars from us to Israel because of that and selling out your people. I'm like, there is not a dime you could give me. There is not enough money in the world to sell out my country.
Yeah.
My country to me matters all the way through as an American. And that's why I really want to hit this home. I know there are going to be comments like, wow, these guys paid for by AIPAC. There'll be some anti-Semitic stuff. There'll be all this other stuff. But my gosh, that's not what drives me in any way, form, or fashion. I cannot eschew it. I wish I could. But that's just life.
Yeah, I mean, we're both America First people. But I think America First for me is not an isolationist view, right? We'll talk about that later, but I think you can be America First and also recognize the global stage that we play on.
You know who's co-opted that term, correct?
Trump
created it. Now that is the term that Nick Fuentes' side uses to describe them versus MAGA.
Oh.
So they're America First versus MAGA.
Well, yeah, I'm debating that right now. I'm saying that America First does not necessarily mean America only or American isolationism.
Yeah.
Right? We have interest in other countries.
Oh, clearly.
And other countries have interest in us. And I think this point on AIPAC should be hit home a little more, that the overall contribution to even a presidential campaign by AIPAC is so minusculely small.
Yeah, I just think that the political messaging I see online where people are like, we're sending all of our money to foreign countries. I'm like, bro, if you could understand what the actual problem with our spending is, that is 0.05%, 0.06% when it comes to Israel, and it's 0.1% overall of our spending. The actual bulk of spending, 60% of your money is getting sent to old people. You're being distracted from the actual root of a lot of our democratic problems. But that's why it's frustrating me. I'm like, I don't understand what the heck is going on. I'm trying to deal with the substance, with real issues. The Israel issue should be a 50 issue.
This is the last time we're ever going to talk about Israel.
I really think that this is going to be the last one because neither of us thinks that this is something that should be so cataclysmic. Mm-hmm. Unless it gets a lot of views, then maybe we'll talk about it again.
Yeah, it probably will.
I mean, it probably will.
Yeah.
Or maybe it'll get 50.
But yeah, our money towards Israel is a very small percentage of our pocket, and the money Israel's putting back into our political system is a very small percentage of the overall political campaign finances.
What do you feel when you see Trump say God bless Israel?
Great. God bless Canada. God bless the UK. don't bless the Saudis. You know what I mean?
It's interesting. I actually have a different reaction to that. I don't like seeing like foreign flags flown in America as much.
Yeah.
I don't like seeing I don't like the messaging that's like more pro other countries. I mean, I think it's
God makes the rain and the sun fall and shine on both the sinners and the saints.
Yeah,
that's something like that in the Bible.
I think what I'm trying to articulate though is that like I actually understand that hesitance online with the Israel stuff of like I feel like I've seen too much of it to the point that like I understand that concern of why are we talking so much about it as a society? I agree with that.
I agree with that, but I also will say that this is like one of the most talked about things in the political climate right now. And like that's why a lot of my effort at Harvard Law, like Shanee was saying, did not come here with the intent of pouring into pro-Israel advocacy, but it seems like there's such a lack of voice at Harvard that I want to pour into it. And so we're talking about it a lot because it is talked about a lot. And so it's almost like, I would wish that it would kind of fade back in. I wish that people would realize that this isn't a huge part of our spending or our political campaign, but like people have that misconception. And so we need to talk about it, and we need to talk about why we're pro-Israel because of that.
Yeah, and that's the reasoning in response. I don't have much more to say on this topic. I mean, actually, excuse me. I have a ton more that I could say. I could ramble for hours and hours from all my experiences with it now, and the fact that I know that there's going to be a lot of hilarious comments that I actually will think would be very funny insults and derogatives.
Let's just quickly then talk about like what we see as the way forward.
Yeah, what's the way forward?
Okay. Definitely we've hit on Arab cooperation with Israel, right? Muslim cooperation with the Jews.
I'm very pessimistic about the way forward.
I am also very confused.
I'm just gonna be real with this.
I think this is
Shanee was really optimistic. I am not. Well, she wasn't necessarily optimistic. She was just talking about talking.
This is one of the things I took away from the trip, okay? If you want to have an opinion on Israel about the Middle East generally, you need to go there. You need to go to Israel. You need to go to other countries, and you need to see on the ground what it's like for the people there and what the climate is like, right? Like I think of a quote that I heard from a very popular pro-Israel guy who says like, you guys, he'll in a debate, he'll be like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
This is Douglas Murray, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I didn't want to say that.
Because I think he did a terrible job in that debate, though. I don't really agree with his approach, but
he did. I had the same response when I first listened to that Joe Rogan episode. Like, Douglas, you kind of butchered this one a little bit, but like that line that like you guys have no idea what you're talking about, I think really resonated with me when I was there. I felt like I just feel like all these movements on campuses and in our geopolitical space, like people really have no idea what they're talking about. It is so much more complicated than we give it credit for.
Yeah, I know. It's just so unpersuasive. I mean, I just did this a second ago. We're talking saying you don't know what you're talking about. It's just so unpersuasive, right? But I don't know if there is anything that's persuasive.
I don't really care. I mean, I guess I don't really care what you have to say unless you've been on ground. I sympathize with Douglas in that sense.
Well, I mean, and the problem is I think being on ground is important. I do think that you can come to right conclusions from experience, from learning about it and the factual understanding of the situation. Sure. I just also think that there's so much propaganda out there. There's so much propaganda, and it's really difficult to be able to get a sense for what's true and what's not.
Yeah.
So many of my friends are fully convinced that there's a genocide happening. They're fully convinced that the Israeli government is another Nazi regime.
Yeah.
And there's facts out there. There's a lot of videos you can go watch that would make them look that way.
Sure.
And it's really popular as a fringe view,
I guess.
But I think the reasoning behind that ultimately isn't necessarily that people aren't going to see it in person. It's that they don't want to believe it.
Yeah. I mean,
that's the actual reality.
I walked away from this trip feeling less certain, less warm towards Israel, I think. I'm very uncomfortable with some of the settlements. I get it from a security standpoint, but I'm uncomfortable. I think it's really complicated, the situation. I think the only way forward in my mind for a two-state solution is that the Arabs take accountability over some of the Palestinians, and that there's mutual buy-in between Jordan and Egypt.
You need other countries
Israel
to get involved, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally think so. I think gradually de-radicalizing the population cannot happen without efforts of Palestinians and other Muslim countries in that de-radicalization. So sort of a hypothetical way forward is some sort of like land swap deal thing where Israel can maintain a security buffer that it's comfortable with while also giving the Palestinians a congruous state, right? Because right now it looks like Swiss cheese over there.
Yeah.
And I think that like in order for that to happen, a lot of the Palestinians have to be de-radicalized by themselves. And like I think that like if Jordan stepped in as a security force, as a civil authority, over a 20-year plan, I think maybe we could achieve that in like the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, he'll probably get canceled for saying this, but we've talked about this. And like I said at the beginning, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your views, I have zero problems picking winners and losers. And I think that I would rather have an Israeli one state than a Palestinian one, definitely. And in order to maintain like the Jewish majority, it's going to be tough, but I think that
I don't
like
think it's physically possible. I think
the IDF could do whatever the hell they want.
They could, but I also think that I would have serious moral concerns about that.
Me too.
And
that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
I think it is, unfortunately for them. This sounds horrible to put on the shoulders of people, but it's always true. But I'm saying both, them as in the Israelis and the Palestinians. I think that part of what the Israelis have to shoulder in the fact that they have declared like that this is their homeland, that this is the state that they have declared and that they're facilitating, that there are certain moral obligations that I think that come with that. And that is the fact that you're going to make some policy choices that are going to come at the risk of your people at times in order to maintain innocent life among people who may not be your own. And that is something that, like, I think other people would have very different views on. I think it's funny because a lot of, the far-right people would be like, why do we need to care morally about anybody else? It's just our nation, right? And yet I do think that there are moral responsibilities that you have as people. And so as a byproduct of that, as much as I'm pessimistic, I am insanely pessimistic.
What's your way forward, Mason?
I am insanely pessimistic about the future.
Solve the crisis.
I'm insanely pessimistic about the future of the crisis because of the fact that I think that that Hamas and Fatah and these others, I don't think that they want to negotiate. I think that their end goal is to displace all the Israelis. I think that your average Palestinian solution is deporting every single Jew from all of Israel, and that your more radical elements are killing all of them. And so because of that, I talk with Israelis, they want a two-state solution. That's the average view that was originally the case. October 7th has changed the calculus because they don't feel like they can negotiate with the other side anymore. And so I think there's two things that have happened here. One, I think the Palestinian people are so radical, they're so insanely radical that any resources that were given to them, they would dedicate entirely towards what Hamas did in 2005, 2006, which is building a massive subway system of tunnels to defend against an eventual invasion of Israel that they're anticipating once they attack Israel again. And two, I think the other problem is nobody wants to step into that hornet's nest. Because nobody wants to deal with that. Why would Egypt want to deal with that? Why would Syria want to deal with that? Why would Lebanon? Why do we want to deal with it? Nobody wants to deal with it. The only people who have to deal with it are the Israelis. And so that's why it's fundamentally on them to do a lot of that
How do we
policing.
get the Jordanians and the Egyptians to feel like they have to deal with it?
You would have to provide a massive amount of incentive to do that. And I don't think we have the stomach to do something like that. And it would take a long time, and I also think that the Palestinian people, because their priorities are destroying Israel, that they've spent, look at Gaza. They spent 20 years preparing for war rather than actually focusing on developing a society and growing as a culture. Mm-hmm. And the day before October 7th happened, Israel issued even more permits to Gazans to be able to enter Israel and be participating economically in Israel's economy because they're very successful and it's a burgeoning economy. And they would love to help cooperate more and to do all these other things. But as long as their priorities are on reclaiming land from 80 years ago, and you cannot let that go. The moment that that is the case, that you've been willing to let it go, then I could approach this issue differently. Sure. But because I don't think that the Palestinian people can let go of that issue.
You don't think they can? You don't think they can be de-radicalized?
Not anytime soon. Not anytime soon. I mean, I think they're pissed about it to an insane degree.
But what would it take for them to be de-radicalized?
I think it would take a 60-year campaign and occupation of all of the land and forced re-education. And
by
I don't think
Israel
that's,
alone, or do you buy into
I don't know, by any military force, whatever, something like that. And I don't think that's morally feasible in the sense of I think that you'd end up doing things that I think are atrocious. And two, I also think that nobody has a stomach for it pragmatically. So
pragmatically, no one has a stomach for it. But my pitch is it has to come from from multiple players in the region if that is going to happen. Otherwise, we're just going to be in this limbo forever.
Yeah, no, somebody just needs to convince the Palestinians, and this is very unsensitive to say, but it's the truth. It is the truth. This is the cold, hard truth. Somebody needs to just explain to the Palestinians that there is not a right to return. I'm sorry, there's not a right to return. And the argument in response to that, where there's like, well, Israel, the Jews claimed a right to return to their land. They won that land. Okay? The reason that they argue for the right to that their right to return is we came to this land specifically because it's where we were before. And we fought, we protected it, we got it from international recognition, and we were going to hold on to this portion that we were given.
Just a little bit.
But we've been
like
forced to fight for more and more and more and more. And that's how land and control works. And so there are two things that the Palestinians kind of like say more like as a moral matter. They're like, we are obliged to that land. That land belongs to us. And then the other side that I think is more practical of what they're doing is that they're laying all of their lives down to try to take land. And if that's something that you want to do as a civilization, as a people, you're able to choose to do that. But that also, you have to be aware, that means that every other civilization is going to understand that that's your goal and have to act accordingly.
Yeah.
And that's why you're not getting the state that you would like to get. That's why you're not getting economic opportunities. That's why there's military checkpoints. That's why there's all of those other things. This is not saying that Israel's fully free of it. I'm just saying that's the decision that's been made civilizationally, at least from the government. If it changes,
I think Israel has to convince maybe its own population that Judea and Samaria need to be given up to.
That's a really tough ask, but maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, my thought process is I would actually be much more anti-settlement if I thought, again,
yes,
that there was hope to actually have a two-state solution.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think, imagine if they're playing unilaterally. If they're playing unilaterally, it makes sense to allow.
And that's again, I keep coming back to this, like, ideal peaceable world versus, like, you know, real threats and security posture.
Yeah.
That's a very different calculus, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of this is generalization. I mean, talking about the future is always difficult, and again, I say this as like cold, hard truth towards the Palestinian people. The reason I'm arguing this directly towards them is because I'm largely frustrated with the inability to be able to negotiate with them in particular. I can sit down with so many Israelis who would love to have a two-state, who would love to change the policies, who would love to open up doors. But as the old saying goes, if Hamas put down their arms today, there would be peace in the Middle East. If Israel put down their arms, there'd be a second Holocaust. And that is the problem. Until that changes, and if your worldview is like Israel needs to not exist and all this other stuff, this is not going to land on deaf ears. But if your worldview is on like actually achieving peace, the actual way to achieve peace right now is much more targeted at the Palestinians than it is at the Israelis. I think there might be a time when it's more targeted at the Israelis if the Palestinians change their tactics.
Yeah. And if you are one of the people who says Israel has no right to exist, I would just be like, well, where else are the Jews going to go?
Yeah, and they'd be like, well, go back to America, go back to Germany, go back to Egypt, go back to Morocco, go back to Libya and Syria, which had populations of tens of thousands of Jews before all of this, before the Second World War, but then all the Arab countries bought into the same Holocaust narratives and then kicked all of their Jews out and now have zero Jews. The last Jew in Yemen just left. She went to Israel. All of them were kicked out or ostracized from their communities. And so this is the problem with, again, the right of return. That solution of kick all the Jews out doesn't work because all the countries that would have to take those Jews are the same Arab Muslim countries that you're saying they have no right to return, but then also the Palestinians have a right to return.
Yeah.
It's not consistent.
Yeah.
It's difficult. I don't know. There's a lot there.
It's a complicated situation, but let's maybe transition into something lighter.
Yeah, I think we've
now
called
is
it.
time.
There's nothing else I think we need to say on this.
No, I think we've done a poor job as usual. But it's a very messy, complicated situation. I think my head is spinning from the trip. I think I would have had a solution in mind, and that's been muddled.
I think everybody walked away from the trip being like, man, I'm exasperated. I wish that there was more we could do.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that's our full Israel trip.
The world is messy, everyone.
If you managed to listen to all of that, God bless you. That's amazing. I hope you at least listened through Shanee's conversation. Again, not 100% perfect. We might have gotten some of the history wrong. You might have gotten, in your view, all of the facts wrong and the moral assessment wrong. So be it. Please give a longer explanation than, wow, these...
if you think I'm wrong on Muslim culture and society and the history of it,
write in. Let us know.
Suggest a book that I read that changed my mind.
All right, girl problems.
Approach the bench and ask your girl problems.
originally these were supposed to be done in Israel, and so we have Israel-themed girl problems. Okay,
we had an Israel girl on, so
we did. So we can talk a little bit about this. Way. Okay, would you honeymoon in Israel? Ideal honeymoon spot?
Not in Israel for me. No.
Yeah.
I did actually. You know, you
the missile sirens and all that other stuff.
Yeah, it'd be kind of. I mean, that would be kind of cool to be in a bomb shelter together if it was just you on your honeymoon. Imagine what you could get up to in a bomb shelter on your honeymoon. My gosh. But I will say, you know, you talked about Israel being this beautiful land. Da 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 da. I didn't find it that beautiful. You know, I've been to many other countries that I would rather go to. I could name one. Let's go New Zealand. I'd rather go to New Zealand on my honeymoon.
Yeah, for a honeymoon. But okay, yeah, I'm saying it's. I don't think it's as pretty as some of those other places. Absolutely, It's just so historic. That's the one thing. It's so historic.
You'd like want to go on a pilgrimage with her?
I'm just joking. I would totally.
I would do the Camino de Santiago for my honeymoon.
I'm a French countryside kind of honeymoon guy. I think.
Yeah, like Provence or something.
You do a Camino de Santiago. It's like a huge walk.
Yeah, it's like a 30-day hike. You could do it in 30 days.
Oh my gosh, I would not.
Yeah,
do
I would
that.
totally.
I
want
to just lounge around for a honeymoon with a girl,
really?
And then go to. But
imagine as you're walking,
go to wine.
The tension's just building.
Oh, shut up. Okay, shut up.
I mean, you brought up honeymoon.
Talking through that.
There's only one thing on my mind on the honeymoon.
Okay, stop. Okay,
becoming one flesh.
All right, wonderful, very nice. That's part of the marital bond.
It is. It's a beautiful thing.
Is it attractive for a woman to walk around with a huge assault rifle?
Yeah,
because we would pass these girls.
Hot.
We would pass these girls who are like our age or younger. They're like 20-year-old girls.
Don't say they're younger because I just said they're super hot.
Oh, they're like 20 years old,
okay.
Man, and they're like fully dressed out for a night out, and they have like assault rifles strapped to their backs.
Yeah,
I'd walk by her and I'd be like, "That's a pretty," and then I'd be like,
"Whoa." I think it's very attractive. I like the uniforms too. Like some of the IDF girls, pretty cute. Pretty cute.
Listen, I think
true. If you care about the posterity of the nation, like this is another reason that we should have mandatory service obligations because, man, I feel like there is just so much partnership.
For men and women?
Yeah.
Wow.
That happens in the IDF, you know? I'm just saying, like, if you want to encourage people to have children younger and to raise families younger in our country and have more babies, I think the IDF's doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, they have a 3.1 replacement rate, so they're definitely doing something right. That's for sure.
Those uniforms, bro.
They look
them.
pretty. Okay, I'll tell you this. I don't think it's that attractive to see the huge assault rifle. I think it's more just like, wow, she's capable. But I'm not really into guns in the same way, and so because of that, I kind of look at it and I'm like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Anti-Second Amendment guy.
Are Israeli girls intimidating because they're confident or because American men are soft?
Probably a little bit of both.
I think it's both?
Yeah, I think American men are not necessarily soft. I mean, I think British and Canadian men are soft. I don't think American men have the international reputation for being soft.
Interesting.
So I don't think there's like a cultural mismatch there.
I think it's different there,
yeah. And there are plenty of Israelis who are kind of softish.
Yeah, I guess.
Pretty
socialist. They're nicer people. Socialists for sure. In Tel Aviv, when I was there a few months ago, in one of the
man, you go all the time. You really are.
I get paid all the time by them. It's wonderful. If you guys want to find out, you can get a lot of opportunities if you side with Israelis on these things. But I went on a different trip that was just cultural focused.
Yeah.
After not having gone for 10 years, and I was in Tel Aviv at a dance bar called Kalyama, and the guys would walk by the girls in our group, and they just like look at them. They wouldn't even say anything. They go like this, just like kind of like wink at them. Like, come dance with me. Don't even say anything.
That's very Middle Eastern.
Do you like that style though? Like, do you think we should be more like that? Or
no, I don't.
Okay, yeah,
I don't like that style.
Why?
It's not very chivalric, you know. The Middle Eastern world, the Islamic world, didn't really pick up on the chivalry too much. You know, I think they missed out on that.
Some of the girls tend to like it. They like being approached more. I mean, sometimes they really don't.
Yeah.
But like, I guess it's also different too. In the Israeli guys, they tend to be fitter and all this other stuff. So
yeah, and tan.
Yeah.
Dark tan.
And so it kind of is like they walk up, they're like that. The girl's like, okay, sure, I'll come.
Yeah. And they've got big chains on and white shirts.
Oh yeah.
And they smell like cologne.
Would you go on a date to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre?
Yeah,
that's the holiest site in all of Christendom, by the way.
I didn't
Jesus
really
died,
like it that much.
Resurrected. You didn't like it?
I would take her to the Garden of Gethsemane. That was a much nicer church and vibe.
Interesting. Well, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is old. That's the whole point. It's old and it's run down because they can't agree on a renovation.
It's problematic to me. It's problematic to me.
Oh, you don't like what it shows about the church? Mm-hmm. Bro, that's Christianity. I'm sorry.
I know, but it's so tradition based and ritual based. It almost resembles Judaism more than it does Christianity.
You're such a Protestant.
Yeah, well,
Actually, it's interesting. I agree though that it is disconcerting sometimes to see those fights between the monks or stuff like that, and the Coptics having their little ceremony in the back of the temple, back of the tomb, because that's the little portion that they have access to.
Yeah,
it is hard to see.
It is hard to see. I liked seeing the rock, right? That little Golgothan chapel area. That was really cool to me, but like the tomb itself wasn't that great, and I think that was not the most enjoyable part of Jerusalem.
So no date with a girl there.
I'd take her to like Mount of Olives.
Okay, interesting.
Imagine making out on the Mount of Olives.
Goodness.
Or just kissing.
Yeah, just kiss.
Yeah.
Should we date like the Orthodox Jews?
Imagine. Wait, sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
You know how like there's that rock that Jesus prayed on, kissing that together. Imagine what that would do to your relationship. Sparks.
Kissing each other on that,
No,
or
just
kissing
kissing
the rock?
it together and then kissing each other.
That is very weird.
Is it?
I don't
think the
connect with
sparks
that.
would be flying.
I don't connect with that. I do connect with like experience. I don't think that romance is really well placed. I don't think it's well placed in that environment because I'm largely focused on God. And if I turn to the girl and I'm like, wow, I'm so into you. Sometimes like in church, I think it's nice to have a girl by your side and just hold her hand and be like, I'm in a relationship and we're doing this together.
Yeah.
But it's very different from I'm like going to kiss you in church. I don't like
How is it different than praying together? You know?
Praying again, it's lifting towards God. I think that kissing is much more like about you each other, right? Like I'm gonna kiss you because like I like kissing you.
It's about building intimacy, which is like an important part of the relationship.
I guess it could be. What do you guys think about like kissing in a holy site like that? What do you guys think? That'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on. Should we date like Orthodox Jews do, where they like meet in like hotel lobbies and they don't touch each other until like 6 dates? After 6 dates, then they finally get married. It's basically all arranged with matchmakers. It's like
if you're doing that from the Spirit, right? Spirit of the law, desiring to love God and like that's what's driving you, then yeah, sure. But I think that like they miss the point a lot, right? I mean, this is the whole thing with Judaism in general. Like the law misses the point. The law wasn't about, rigorous adherence to it for its own sake. It was meant to point you to your need for God, right? So I think like if you're doing it out of like a love for Christ and a desire to obey him, then it is kind of cool to like
that kind
not
of more
touch it
formal.
All. Yeah.
Yeah, it actually is nice. And it's nice to have those strong boundaries.
It is.
I appreciate it. I don't know if I'd want to meet in a hotel lobby always, but it does make it more structured. You know what to expect.
Yeah. And you just talk for 3 hours and there's no outside expectations. There's no kind of disappointment about, oh, he didn't plan the date well enough. He's not going to be a creative enough guy for me because all of that's removed. It's just the person.
Maybe we should experiment, friends. So is it appropriate to ask for a girl's number in a bomb shelter?
100%. 100%.
So you're looking over, you're like hearing the Iron Dome responding, blowing things up, and you're like...
Yeah, think about The Book Thief, right? That love that was formed between those two.
You read The Book Thief too?
I love
Did you read that in school back in the day?
No.
You read that on your own?
I read it on my own. I think it's such a great book, and I love their relationship in it. And I think that that's kind of the same vibe, right? Like that love... Was it love? I don't know. But that love was formed out of kind of like trauma.
Yeah.
And hiding together and escaping Nazis. And it's beautiful.
That's very nice. I think it's a little inappropriate in the moment. But I think as things are clearing up, you can ask a girl. Like I wouldn't do it like as the
appropriate if
I'd be like
to hug
get
her.
in my arms, hold
exactly.
close, stay close to me.
Yeah.
Stay close to me, young woman. I'll keep you
protect
safe.
you. I'll jump on that grenade for you.
I will. I mean, yeah, that would be incredible. I mean, that's incredible. That's definitely chivalric. That's for sure.
So Jews are known for their, intense opinions, right? Even at Shabbat dinner, it was said that, it's common to have 2 Jews and 3 opinions.
Yes.
So is that kind of debate like a red flag if every single date turns into like a heated conversation where you're debating her and all of a sudden there's 3 opinions entering in?
Okay, I'm going to out myself here.
You want a submissive woman.
No, that's not what I was about to say. What I was about to say is that, like, honestly, some of the most attractive women that I've ever met in my life are like the devout Jewish women that I know. And what I mean by attractive is not just that they're beautiful. It's that they're feminine. They lean into their femininity. They dress modestly, meaning like they don't see a need to like accentuate their female characteristics in order to get attention. Instead, they lean into the aspect of femaleness that I think is actually really incredible, and that's that there's something just so unique about their visage, and they lean into that. And then on top of that too, they're often devoutly religious. Yeah, they're devoutly religious. Yeah. They lean into their faiths. They're very moral in terms of how they approach the world.
Yeah.
They're brilliant often, many of these girls, incredibly smart, and they're strong. Yeah. And they're willing to understand like that there are actual decisions that have to be made. I mean, look at Shanee. Shanee's a good example of this kind of person who you meet and you're just like, she is a all-around, really quality individual who thinks intentionally about things, who's very brilliant, who raises her kids. Like, to me, it was really hard being in Israel and seeing that. And I was like, man, like, I really, like, I'm so attracted to that. But, like, I want it to be with Christianity. Mm-hmm. You know, I want that woman to be that devout, that strong, that into my faith. The faith that is true, in my view.
Yes, for some reason, it does seem like Christianity, it swings to, like, extremes. Like, if you're modest, then it would be surprising if there was, like, a really modest, devout Christian woman who was also really strong and really outspoken and really fiery, right? Like, I feel like those are not commonly associated in my mind in the same way that it wouldn't like confuse me as much, right? If you have like a very orthodox woman who's also like a total firecracker and maybe like very politically liberal, right? Like but that works for them. You know?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing in the Christian circles. You end up with, if you're really conservative, you end up being a little kooky. Mm-hmm. If you're really attractive, you end up often being like either snatched up really early or a little liberal or not that interested in kids. If you're really smart, you're more intent on like these certain ambitions and dreams. But the funny thing about these Jews that I'm talking about is that they're able to still balance all of those traits and yet still be interested in religion, still be interested in a family, still be interested in working for a job. They're able to do that.
But would you get sick of that after a while? I mean,
of course you get sick of everything.
Because we're not Jewish men.
Bro.
I
Okay.
think,
of course, you get sick of everything. Dude, I'm not saying I'm actually going to go after any of this stuff. I'm saying that I wish I could replicate it among a lot of the Christian women that I know. And then I think a lot of Christian women would say the same thing about the Christian men. Yeah. Right? Like they wish they could replicate it in us. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm like, I wish we could be more religious. I wish we could be more religious. I wish we could be more masculine, more feminine. I wish we could lean into intelligence. I wish we could lean into our dreams, our ambitions, all of these things without giving one of those things up in the process.
Yeah.
And it is a wish for a reason. Yeah. It's difficult.
So that's something that we might be able to learn from the Orthodox Jewish community in a way.
There's definitely something there.
That's why I said we are modern Orthodox Christians.
Amen. Modern Orthodox Christians. That is all our girl problems, I think.
Dude, let's rebrand the podcast to
Modern
Orthodox Christian Conservative Harvard Bachelors.
God forgive us. We might have to after this. I mean, now the only people who will give us safe harbors will be the very pro-Israel Jews. So maybe we have to rely more on that revenue stream these days. Maybe we lean in. Next episode, you'll see us wearing yarmulkes and.
I mean, I am thinking of leaning into my like exploration of old kind of Jew. How do I say this? Jewish apologetics.
Interesting, yeah.
Like that's where my heart's been leading me recently. So watch out, Jews. Jesus is coming.
We're going to try to. That's a very interesting thing. I wish we talked more about that.
And you don't have to give up that Jewishness either.
Yeah, I wish we talked more about that. That's one of the things that was on our hearts during the trip. Yeah. Is like, how do we evangelize well to the Jews? Especially they know that we're trying to evangelize. Everybody knows. It's like we're an evangelistic religion. That's how it works. Yeah. But I've often thought about that. Like, how do we reach people with our faith and our views and not make it feel like we're trying to convert them? Like, because obviously we want them to convert, but above all else, we want them to know the love of God. Mm-hmm. We want them to know what we've experienced.
Yeah, and Jesus as the Savior. And I walked away from the trip actually feeling really encouraged with what God had done on the trip and the doors that he had opened up and the conversations that were had with people on the trip and with people not on the trip. Like at Shabbat dinner, I was talking about Jesus pretty openly with everyone at the table.
Thank God for that.
Yeah. It was cool. And like a couple of the Jewish students on the trip walked away from it saying, I learned more about Jesus on this trip than I ever have in my life.
And that's a blessing from God.
Which is cool.
That's a blessing from God. Amen. That's the stuff that we're looking for.
Good job, Mason. You're supposed to say good job, Will. But
yeah, good job, Will. Thanks. All right. That is a lengthy episode on all things Israel. We're going to try our best not to have to go back into this topic probably in the future because I think as much as I find it interesting to talk about, I'm always morally conflicted every time I say something because I know that there's more factual details to the things I'm saying. Yeah. It's hard to discuss. So please give us a little bit of grace.
Next episode, we'll be talking about fascism and Nazi Germany. Stay tuned, everyone.
Not really.
See ya.
See ya. And Jesus loves you.